The nightmare always started the same way. The low rumble of the M1A1 Abrams tank engine, the acrid smell of cordite and diesel, the crackling radio chatter punctuated by desperate calls for support, and then the blinding flash as the Iraqi T-72 erupted in a fireball just 70 meters ahead. Colonel William Steele Bill Steele jolted awake, his body drenched in sweat despite the cool Texas morning. 34 years had passed since Operation Desert Storm, but the memories remained as vivid as the day they were forged in the crucible of combat. His weathered hand instinctively reached for the nightstand, fingers wrapping around the worn metal of his tank commander's coin, a ritual performed countless times over the decades. "Third of the 8th Cavalry," he muttered to himself, thumb tracing the engraved motto on the coin's edge, "Honor first." Steele's bones protested as he rose from bed, 63 years of gravity and war taking their toll. The first light of dawn filtered through the curtains of his modest ranch house outside of Killeen, Texas. The walls of his bedroom told the story that his lips often wouldn't. Photographs of 4 generations of Steele men in uniform, 3 presidential citations, and the Medal of Honor that he never discussed, earned during that fateful February morning in 1991 at the Battle of 73 Easting. The coffee maker gurgled in the kitchen as Steele stared out at his 15 acres of Texas hill country. The land was his sanctuary after retirement, far enough from Fort Hood to escape the constant reminder of his past life, but close enough to hear the distant thunder of artillery practice on clear days. In the barn out back sat his prized possession, a restored 1969 Pontiac GTO, the same model he had promised himself he would own someday while staring at magazines during long nights on watch in Vietnam. The landline phone rarely rang these days. Most people used his cell. So when the harsh bell cut through the morning silence, Steele felt a familiar tightening in his chest. Only bad news or old friends use the landline. "Steele," he answered, his voice still carrying the command presence that had once directed an entire armored battalion. "Bill, it's Frank." The voice belonged to Lieutenant General Franklin Mitchell, current Deputy Chief of Staff for Operations at the Pentagon, and more importantly, Steele's gunner during Desert Storm. "Frank, it's been a while." Steele leaned against the kitchen counter, knowing from his friend's tone that this wasn't a social call. "Bill, we're in trouble. Deep trouble." Mitchell's voice was grave, none of the usual banter they typically exchanged. "The Abrams fleet is collapsing. Readiness numbers are in free fall. I need you to come to Washington." Steele stared at the model of his old tank, Iron Thunder, sitting on the bookshelf across the room. The 135 scale M1A1 was meticulously painted with the kill markings from Desert Storm, 11 Iraqi tanks in a single day of combat. "Frank, I've been retired for 8 years. What could I possibly do that your current brass can't? Because they don't understand what we understand, Bill. They never faced down Soviet-made armor in the desert. They never had to make life-and-death decisions with incomplete information and no satellite support." Mitchell paused. "The president has authorized Project Iron Forge. We're rebuilding the armored core from the ground up. Full authority, direct report to SecDef." Steele remained silent, watching a red-tailed hawk circle above his pasture through the window. "Bill, you're the only one they'll listen to. The only tank commander with enough stars and scars to make them believe. I've got a plane waiting at Austin Bergstrom. This isn't a request from an old friend. This is a call from your country." The hawk dove suddenly, talons extended. Purpose absolute. Steele watched it disappear behind the tree line, its decision made. "Send the details. I'll be there." 4 hours later, Steele stepped off a C-37B Gulfstream at Andrews Air Force Base. He wore his civilian clothes, pressed khaki pants and a blue button-down that strained slightly at his still broad shoulders. Despite regular workouts, age had added a slight paunch to his formerly flat stomach. His hair had gone completely gray, cut in the same military style he'd worn for 40 years of service. General Mitchell waited on the tarmac, still ramrod straight at 62. The two men embraced briefly, a firm clap on the back, their only acknowledgement of a friendship forged through 3 wars together. "Thanks for coming, Bill," Mitchell said as they walked toward a waiting SUV. "Things are worse than I could say over the phone." The drive to the Pentagon was filled with terse briefing points. The collapse in tank maintenance expertise after 20 years of counterinsurgency. The exodus of experienced NCOs. The mothballing of hundreds of Abrams tanks in the Arizona desert. The recruitment crisis. But it wasn't until they arrived at the secure briefing room deep within the Pentagon that Steele understood the true magnitude of the crisis. 7 men and women sat around the table, representing the Joint Chiefs, Armor Branch, and Defense Intelligence Agency. On the wall, a digital board displayed numbers that made Steele's blood run cold. Operational readiness rate, M1A2, SCPV3, Abrams, 28%, average tank commander. Experience, 2.2 years. Maintenance backlog, 37,412 critical repair hours. Ammunition. Stockpile, 3.1 combat days. 3 days, Steele muttered, staring at the last figure. We have ammunition for 3 days of high-intensity conflict. Army Chief of Staff General Howard nodded grimly. That's if we manage to get all operational tanks fully loaded, which we currently cannot. Steele took the seat at the end of the table, scanning the faces around him. Most were too young to have seen Desert Storm. None had commanded tanks in actual force-on-force combat against near-peer adversaries. Show me everything, Steele said. For the next 3 hours, he absorbed the full catastrophe. Intelligence assessments of adversary tank forces that had grown while America focused elsewhere. Maintenance reports showing critical parts shortages. Training evaluations revealing tank crews that could operate the technology but lacked fundamental armored warfare skills. Then came the video that Mitchell had been holding back. Footage from the most recent NATO exercise in Poland, showing American M1A2 tanks being systematically outmaneuvered and destroyed by opposing forces using obsolescent T-72 variants with upgraded electronics. Turn it off, Steele said quietly after watching American tanks repeatedly fall into simple ambushes that his sergeants would have avoided 30 years ago. The room fell silent as he closed his eyes, processing what he had seen. How did we let this happen? He finally asked. A colonel from the armor branch cleared his throat. Sir, after the Cold War ended, we had a peace dividend, then 2 decades of counterinsurgency warfare. The focus shifted to light infantry, special operations, drone warfare. Tanks seemed obsolete. Obsolete? Steele's voice remained dangerously calm. Tell that to the Ukrainians. Tell that to the Israelis. Tell that to any nation that faces an existential threat from a land army. He pointed to the screen where the exercise footage had been playing. What you just showed me isn't a technology gap. It's a skill gap, a leadership gap, a failure to transmit the hard-earned knowledge paid for in blood. The Secretary of Defense, who had been silent until now, leaned forward. That's exactly why you're here, Colonel Steele. We need someone who remembers. 3 hours later, a convoy of black Suburbans drove through the gates of Fort Hood, Texas. Steele sat in the second vehicle, staring out at the place that had been his professional home for much of his career. The sprawling base housed the heart of America's armored forces, including the historic 1st Cavalry Division. But instead of heading toward the main parade ground or headquarters buildings, the convoy turned down a rarely used access road, past warning signs and guard posts, until they reached what the tankers darkly called the Boneyard. Steele stepped out into the Texas heat, sunglasses doing little to dim the sight before him. Rows upon rows of M1 Abrams tanks stretched across the horizon, their once proud profiles now covered in protective tarps and preservation materials. Hundreds of the most lethal land weapons ever created, silent and dormant. How many? He asked the young major who had been assigned as his aide. 812 at this facility alone, sir, the major replied. Another 600 at Sierra Army Depot in California. Steele approached the nearest tank, pulling back the protective covering and to reveal the gunner's primary sight. Once, he could identify every component of this weapon system blindfolded. His fingers traced the dust-covered metal, muscle memory still intact after all these years. This isn't just equipment, he said quietly. This is America's insurance policy. This is what keeps every other nation on Earth from thinking they can take what isn't theirs. The major remained silent, sensing that Steele wasn't really speaking to him. What's your name, son? Steele asked suddenly. Major David Steele, sir. No relation. The young officer straightened instinctively. Steele studied him for a moment. Tank commander? No, sir. I'm with the Autonomous Weapons Division. I specialize in unmanned combat systems. Something flickered in the older man's eyes. Of course you are. He turned back to the abandoned tank. When's the last time you fired a 120 mm main gun, Major? The younger man hesitated. In training, sir, 8 years ago. Steele nodded as if confirming something to himself. Have them uncover Iron Thunder. I want to see her. The major looked confused. Sir, Hull number A231, 3rd Platoon, Charlie Company, 3rd of the 8th Cav. She should be here unless someone was stupid enough to scrap her. A flurry of radio calls, and 30 minutes later, workers were removing the preservation coverings from a tank situated in a far corner of the facility. As the canvas came away, the faded marking became visible on the turret. The silhouette of a buffalo with a lightning bolt, the emblem of the 3rd Battalion, 8th Cavalry Regiment. Steele approached slowly, like a man reuniting with a long-lost love. His hand brushed away dust from the commander's cupola, revealing the worn metal where his hands had gripped during thousands of hours of operation. "Hello, old girl," he whispered. Inside the tank, memories flooded back. The cramped conditions, the smell of hydraulic fluid, gun oil, and sweat. The way the entire vehicle would rock backward when the main gun fired. The perfect harmony of a four-man crew working as a single organism. Steele settled into the commander's seat, his body remembering exactly how to position itself despite the decades that had passed. His hands found the controls automatically, fingers wrapping around the grips that had once been extensions of his own body. "Sir," the major's voice came from outside the tank. "General Mitchell is waiting at the briefing center." Steele remained motionless for a moment longer, then pulled himself out of the commander's hatch with a grunt of effort. As he climbed down, he noticed a young private watching him with undisguised curiosity. "First time seeing one up close, son?" Steele asked. "Yes, sir," the private replied. "I'm training on the remote weapons platforms. They tell us these will all be museum pieces soon." Steele's jaw tightened. "What's your name, Private?" "Jenkins, sir, Michael Jenkins." "Well, Private Jenkins, let me tell you something about museum pieces. The Roman legions thought cavalry was obsolete. The cavalry thought tanks were obsolete. Everyone thinks the old way of war is obsolete until they're staring down the barrel of exactly what they needed but got rid of." He gestured toward the tank. "This machine survived direct hits that would have vaporized your remote platform. This machine kept fighting when all our comms were jammed. This machine killed 11 T-72s in a single day when our aerial assets couldn't fly due to sandstorms." The private stood straighter, somehow sensing he was receiving wisdom that wouldn't be found in his technical manuals. "Remember this, Jenkins. Technology changes, the enemy gets a vote, and a tank commander never quits." The Pentagon's Special Projects Briefing Room had been converted into what would serve as the headquarters for Operation Iron Forge. Maps covered the walls, showing the disposition of American armored forces worldwide. Computer screens displayed readiness statistics, maintenance schedules, and training programs. Lieutenant General Mitchell stood at the head of the conference table, addressing the dozen officers and civilians who had been handpicked for the project. "Ladies and gentlemen, I present Colonel William Steele, Congressional Medal of Honor recipient, former commander of the 3rd Armored Cavalry Regiment, and the man who will lead Operation Iron Forge." Steele nodded at the introduction, studying the faces around the table. Most were unfamiliar, but 3 caused him to pause. "I've asked Colonel Steele to assemble a core team of armor experts," Mitchell continued. "Some of you may already know Sergeant Major Calvin Eagle Eye Wilson, former master gunner of the 1st Armored Division. Wilson, a barrel-chested African-American man with close-cropped gray hair, nodded at the room. At 59, he was a legend among tankers for his 23 confirmed kills during Desert Storm and Operation Iraqi Freedom. Also joining us is Lieutenant Colonel Michael Rodriguez, currently instructor at the Armor School at Fort Benning. Rodriguez, 52, had been a platoon leader under Steele's command during the invasion of Iraq. His expertise in urban tank warfare had literally written the current doctrinal manual on the subject. And heading our engineering team, Dr. Rebecca Harding from MIT's Mobility Systems Laboratory. Dr. Harding, a woman in her early 40s with auburn hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, was the only civilian among the core team. Her father had been a tank battalion commander, and she had dedicated her career to advancing armored vehicle technology. "The president has given us 18 months and an initial budget of $175 billion, Mitchell explained. "Our mission is nothing less than the complete revitalization of America's armored forces. Colonel Steele will outline our approach." Steele moved to the front of the room, no PowerPoint slides or digital aids, just 4 decades of experience and a clear vision of what needed to be done. "We face 3 critical shortfalls," he began, his deep voice filling the room without effort. "Equipment readiness, crew proficiency, and tactical expertise. Our tanks are in disrepair, our crews don't know how to use them effectively, and our leaders have forgotten the art of armored warfare." He pointed to the map of Fort Hood. We will establish the Tank Force Revival Center at Fort Hood with three distinct components. Operation Junkyard Revival will restore 1,100 mothballed Abrams tanks to full operational status within 12 months. The Tank Commander Academy will retrain 5,000 officers and NCOs in advanced armored warfare tactics, and the Steele Integration Program will develop protocols for integrating our armor with modern electronic warfare defenses. A hand went up from the lieutenant colonel with Cyber Command insignia. Sir, with respect, wouldn't it be more effective to invest in next-generation autonomous combat vehicles? The technology is nearly ready, and it would solve our personnel shortages. Steele had expected this question. Lieutenant Colonel. Westmore, sir. Maxwell Westmore. Colonel Westmore, have you ever been inside a tank during combat? The younger officer straightened. No, sir, but I've run over 300 simulations of... 300 simulations, Steele repeated. I've been in 16 actual tank battles. In none of them did the enemy behave according to our simulations. In all of them, the difference between victory and defeat came down to the human element, judgment, intuition, and the will to continue fighting when systems failed. He swept his gaze across the room. We will absolutely incorporate autonomous systems where appropriate, but the core of American armored power will remain the tank crew, 4 humans making life or death decisions in real time, under conditions that no AI can fully comprehend. Westmore's expression remained professionally neutral, but Steele caught the flash of resentment in his eyes. He had just made his first enemy in the program, but it wouldn't be the last. As the briefing continued, Steele outlined the timeline for the project. The first phase would focus on equipment restoration, pulling the most combat-ready tanks from storage and addressing critical maintenance issues. The second phase would launch the retraining program for crews. The final phase would integrate the revitalized tank forces with modern network warfare capabilities. Questions, Steele asked as he concluded. Sir, a major from the Defense Intelligence Agency spoke up. Our latest assessments show that potential adversaries have significantly increased their anti-tank capabilities. How do you propose to address the proliferation of advanced ATGMs and top-attack munitions? Steele nodded, appreciating the substantive question. The Abrams was designed to survive hits that would destroy any other tank on the battlefield. We've become too focused on avoiding being hit at all, which is certainly preferable, but not always possible. We'll be implementing the Trophy Active Protection System across the fleet, while also reviving the lost art of armored maneuver warfare, using terrain, smoke, and coordinated movement to reduce exposure. The discussion continued for another hour, with Steele addressing concerns and explaining his vision. By the end, the room had divided into 2 clear camps, those who believed in the project's mission and those who remained skeptical that conventional armored forces deserve such investment. As the meeting adjourned, Sergeant Major Wilson approached Steele. Just like old times, sir, the veteran gunner said with a slight smile. Except we're the old ones now, Calvin, Steele replied, clapping his former subordinate on the shoulder. Speak for yourself, sir. I can still outshoot any of these PlayStation jockeys. Steele laughed, the first genuine laugh since receiving Mitchell's call. I don't doubt it. You got time for a drink? We should catch up before the real work begins. Wilson nodded. The officers' club still makes a decent old-fashioned. As they walked out, Lieutenant Colonel Westmore brushed past them, not bothering to hide his disdain. Enjoy reminiscing about the good old days, gentlemen. The future of warfare won't wait for nostalgia. Wilson started to respond, but Steele held up a hand. Save it, Calvin. We've got bigger targets to engage. Later that evening, Steele sat in his temporary quarters reviewing personnel files for the project team. His focus kept returning to Lieutenant Colonel Westmore's record. West Point graduate, Rhodes Scholar, doctoral degree in artificial intelligence from Stanford. Multiple tours with Cyber Command and the Pentagon's Emerging Capabilities Office. 0 combat experience. A knock at the door interrupted his reading. Enter, he called, expecting it to be Wilson or Rodriguez. Instead, Major David Steele stepped into the room, still in his duty uniform despite the late hour. Major, Steele acknowledged, setting aside the files. Something urgent? No, sir, The younger man hesitated. I wanted to apologize for my response earlier about not having fired a main gun recently. I realized how that must have sounded. Steele studied him for a moment. Sit down, Major. The young officer took the chair across from Steele's desk. You're with the Autonomous Systems Group. I assume you've been working on the XM1 program? Major Steele nodded. Yes, sir, the unmanned tank prototype. And you believe that's the future? I do. The Major leaned forward slightly. The XM-1 can operate in environments that would kill a human crew. It never gets tired. It processes targeting data faster than any human. It doesn't experience fear. All true, the colonel conceded. Now tell me, what happens when your data link is jammed? When your GPS is spoofed? When an EMP knocks out your electronics? We have redundancies, sir, multiple communication pathways, hardened circuits, all of which add complexity, and complexity is the enemy of reliability in combat. Steele stood and walked to the small window overlooking the parade ground. In Desert Storm, we lost all communications for 6 hours during a sandstorm. No satellites, no radio, nothing. You know what we relied on? The Major shook his head. Training, instinct, and the simple battle plan we had memorized. We destroyed 3 companies of Iraqi armor without firing a single networked shot. He turned back to face the younger officer. Your autonomous tanks are impressive technology, Major, but technology fails, especially when the enemy is actively trying to make it fail. Humans adapt. Major Steele remained respectfully silent, but his expression revealed his skepticism. I'm not against innovation, son, but I've seen too many good soldiers die when we became overly reliant on systems that failed when we needed them most. The colonel returned to his desk. You're assigned to my team now. I want you to keep advocating for your systems. We need that perspective. But I also want you to requalify on the Abrams. Experience what you're trying to replace before you replace it. Yes, sir, the Major replied, his tone carefully neutral. Dismissed. After the Major left, Steele poured himself 2 fingers of bourbon from the bottle he'd brought from home. He rarely drank these days, but tonight seemed to call for it. As he sipped the amber liquid, his phone buzzed with a text from General Mitchell. White House briefing tomorrow, 0900. POTUS wants to meet you. Steele set down the glass and stared at the message. The President of the United States wanted a personal briefing. The stakes were getting higher. At 7:45 the next morning, Steele stood in the White House Situation Room, reviewing his notes one final time. He wore his Class A uniform, the rows of ribbons on his chest telling the story of a career spent in service to his country. The Medal of Honor hung heavy around his neck, worn only at the explicit request of General Mitchell. The door opened, and the National Security Advisor entered, followed by the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the Secretary of Defense, and finally the President of the United States. Ladies and gentlemen, be seated, the President said, taking his place at the head of the table. His eyes found Steele. Colonel, I've heard a lot about you. Your reputation precedes you. Thank you, Mr. President, Steele replied. I understand you have some concerns about the state of our armored forces. Steele glanced at General Mitchell, who gave a slight nod. Not concerns, Mr. President. Alarms. Our tank fleet is in a state of critical decline. Readiness rates below 30%. Crews undertrained. Tactical expertise dying with each retirement. If we were to face a near-peer adversary tomorrow, our armored forces would be combat ineffective within 72 hours. A murmur ran through the room at the bluntness of the assessment. The President leaned forward. And you believe Operation Iron Forge can reverse this decline? Yes, sir, I do, with adequate resources and authority. You have both, Colonel. What I need to know is if 18 months is enough time. Intelligence suggests our adversaries are accelerating their own armored modernization programs. Steele considered the question carefully. 18 months will restore basic combat capability, Mr. President. Full restoration of America's armored supremacy will take 36 months, minimum. The President nodded, turning to the Secretary of Defense. Make it happen, whatever resources Colonel Steele needs. Mr. President, the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs interjected, we should consider that many in Congress believe our future lies in unmanned systems, not traditional armor. I'm aware of that perspective, General, the President replied, but I've reviewed the classified assessments. Our adversaries are betting heavily on armored forces. They've learned the lessons we're forgetting, that you can't hold territory without tanks, and wars aren't won by standoff weapons alone. He turned back to Steele. You'll have political cover from the White House, Colonel. Your job is to make sure this investment pays off. It will, Mr. President. As the meeting concluded and officials filtered out of the Situation Room, Steele found himself alone with the President. You know, Colonel, my father served in Vietnam, the President said. He always told me that the sound of an American tank was the most beautiful thing he ever heard in that country. Said it meant the cavalry had arrived in the most literal sense. Steele nodded. I was there too, sir, late in the war. M48 Pattons. Not our best tank, but still better than not having tanks. That's what this is really about, isn't it? Not just readiness, statistics, or budget priorities, but making sure that when American soldiers are in harm's way, they have the support they need. Exactly, Mr. President. Every tanker knows we don't fight for ourselves. We fight to make sure our infantry brothers and sisters go home alive. The president extended his hand. Make it happen, Colonel. The country's counting on you. 3 weeks later, Fort Hood was transformed. The sleepy tank depot had become a hive of activity, with crews working around the clock to resurrect America's armored fleet. Steele had established his headquarters in a repurposed maintenance facility, preferring to be in the middle of the action rather than in a comfortable office. The core team had expanded to include the best tank mechanics, instructors, and combat veterans that Steele and his lieutenants could find. Many were recalled from retirement, gray-haired NCOs and officers who had thought their days of service were behind them. Sergeant Major Wilson had established the resurrected Tank Master Gunner School, putting a new generation of gunners through the rigorous training that had once been the hallmark of American armored forces. Lieutenant Colonel Rodriguez was developing updated tactical doctrine, combining old-school maneuver warfare with modern threat environments. Dr. Harding had assembled a team of engineers focused on upgrading the Abrams' survivability against modern threats, particularly electronic warfare and top attack munitions. Her expertise in material science was proving invaluable as they worked to lightweight the aging behemoth without sacrificing protection. Steele was making his morning rounds when the alert came in. A priority message from the Pentagon flagged for his immediate attention. He hurried to the command center, where Major David Steele was already reviewing the intelligence report on the main screen. "What do we have, Major?" Steele asked. "Sir, massive cyber attack against defense networks, beginning approximately 90 minutes ago. Department-wide systems degradation, GPS spoofing detected across multiple theaters, unmanned aerial systems grounded due to command and control interference." Steele scanned the report, his expression darkening. "Casualties?" "None reported yet, sir, but the autonomous combat vehicle test at White Sands has gone dark. 23 XM-1 prototypes were in the middle of a live-fire exercise when the attack began. The implications were immediate and severe. The very systems that Lieutenant Colonel Westmore and others had championed as the future of warfare were now sitting paralyzed in the New Mexico desert. "Get me General Mitchell," Steele ordered. While waiting for their connection, Steele studied the map of affected systems. The pattern wasn't random. Critical command and control nodes had been targeted with precision, suggesting intimate knowledge of U.S. defense architecture. "Colonel Steele," Mitchell's voice came through the secure line, tension evident even through the digital encryption. "I assume you've seen the reports." "Yes, sir. How bad is it?" "Worse than what's in the brief. The autonomous fleet isn't just offline. They've been compromised. 3 XM-1s opened fire on an observation post before emergency protocols shut down their weapon systems." Steele closed his eyes briefly, processing the implications. "Casualties?" "2 wounded, nothing life-threatening, but it could have been much worse." Mitchell paused. "Bill, this validates everything you've been saying. The president wants to see you again. Now." "On my way." Steele turned to his aide. "Major, have my plane prepped, and get me the latest readiness numbers on our revived tanks." "Sir, should we accelerate the restoration schedule?" "Yes. Priority on combat-ready units with full conventional capabilities. Minimal electronic dependencies." As the major hurried off, Dr. Harding approached, tablet in hand. "Colonel, you should see this before you go." She handed him the device, which displayed schematics for what appeared to be a modified communication suite. "What am I looking at, Doctor?" "We're calling it the Iron Mesh. It's a hardened, localized communication system for tank platoons. Works without satellite uplink, resistant to most known jamming technologies. It won't give you the range or bandwidth of current systems, but it will keep working when everything else fails," Steele finished. "This is exactly what we need. How soon can we prototype?" 3 weeks for the first unit, if I can get priority resource allocation." Steele handed back the tablet. "You have it. This just became our top engineering priority." An hour later, Steele was airborne in a C-37 heading back to Washington. As the Texas landscape receded below him, he couldn't help but feel a grim satisfaction. The cyber attack was a disaster, but it proved what he had been arguing since the beginning of the project. In modern warfare, simpler sometimes meant more survivable. Human operators could adapt when algorithms failed. His phone buzzed with a message from Sergeant Major Wilson. First batch of restored Abrams, operational. 37 tanks combat ready. Crew standing by. Old tankers never quit. Steele smiled slightly, then turned his attention to the intelligence report. The attack pattern suggested a level of sophistication that few nations possessed. The timing, just as the autonomous vehicle test reached its most critical phase, couldn't be coincidental. Someone had wanted to demonstrate the vulnerability of America's most advanced weapon systems, and they had succeeded spectacularly. By the time Steele landed at Andrews, the situation had evolved further. Major Steele met him on the tarmac, face grim. "Sir, the attack has expanded. Most of our networked weapons platforms across Europe are experiencing command and control issues. NATO communications compromised in at least 3 sectors. And our conventional forces? Largely unaffected, sir. The older systems without advanced networking are still operational." Steele nodded, a hypothesis forming in his mind. "This isn't just an attack, Major. It's a message." The Pentagon was in a state of controlled chaos when they arrived. In the National Military Command Center, screens displayed the status of forces worldwide, many flashing red to indicate degraded capabilities. General Mitchell intercepted them at the security checkpoint. "Bill, the president's already in the tank. Things have escalated." "How bad?" "Satellite imagery shows armored columns on the move near NATO's eastern flank. Could be exercises, could be positioning for something else. With our surveillance capabilities compromised, we're partially blind." The tank, the secure conference room used by the Joint Chiefs of Staff, was filled beyond capacity when Steele entered. The president sat at the head of the table, expression grave as he consulted with the Secretary of Defense. "Colonel Steele," the president acknowledged, "your assessment was prescient, it seems." "I wish it hadn't been, Mr. President." Steele took the offered seat. "What's our current status?" The chairman of the Joint Chiefs activated a display showing Europe. "We've lost effective control of approximately 60% of our network weapon systems across the theater. Most unmanned platforms are grounded or operating in degraded capacity only. GPS is unreliable in multiple sectors. Communications are compromised, but functional with additional encryption." "And the adversary movements?" 3 mechanized divisions, fully mobilized, conducting exercises 15 kilometers from the border. Another 2 divisions appear to be moving to join them. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. America had spent decades building the world's most technologically advanced military, only to have its advantages neutralized in a matter of hours. "Options?" the president asked. The Air Force Chief of Staff spoke first. "Sir, we're working to restore full spectrum dominance. Backup systems are being brought online. Hardened communications are being prioritized. We estimate 36 to 48 hours to restore basic capabilities." "We may not have 48 hours, the Army Chief countered. "If those forces across the border decide this is their window of opportunity, we're looking at a conventional overmatch situation until our systems come back online." The president turned to Steele. "Colonel, what's the status of Operation Iron Forge?" "Sir, we've restored 37 M1A2 Abrams to full combat readiness in the past 3 weeks. Another 53 are at 80% readiness. Crews are assembled but undertrained by my standards." "Can they fight?" Steele didn't hesitate. "Yes, Mr. President. They're not at peak effectiveness, but they're functional and they're immune to the electronic warfare affecting our more advanced systems." "Where are they now?" "Fort Hood, sir." The president exchanged a look with the Secretary of Defense, some unspoken communication passing between them. "Colonel," the president said, "how quickly can those tanks be deployed to Europe?" The question hung in the air. Steele calculated rapidly. "The C-17 can carry 1 M1 Abrams. We have 37 ready. If every available strategic airlifter is committed, we could have them in Germany within 36 hours, sir." "And crews?" "We can send the restored tanks with their current crews." "It wouldn't be the first time American tanks have been rushed to Europe in a crisis, Mr. President." The president nodded slowly. "Do it. General Mitchell, I want those tanks and crews on planes within 6 hours. Colonel Steele will oversee the deployment personally." A murmur ran through the room. Steele felt the weight of history settling on his shoulders. 37 tanks wouldn't turn the tide of a major conflict, but they would send a message. America could still project conventional military power even when its technological advantages were neutralized. As the meeting adjourned, Lieutenant Colonel Westmore approached Steele in the corridor outside. "Congratulations, Colonel," he said, voice dripping with barely concealed contempt. "Your museum pieces just became relevant again." Steele regarded him calmly. Those museum pieces are the only weapons still fully under our control, Colonel. Remember that the next time you design a system that can be turned off with the flip of a switch halfway around the world. Westmore's expression hardened. This is a temporary setback. The autonomous platforms are the future. Maybe so, but right now, the present belongs to men and women in steel boxes, making decisions that no algorithm can replicate. Steele stepped closer, lowering his voice. And if you ever refer to the weapons that brave Americans have died in as museum pieces again, you and I are going to have a very different kind of conversation. Are we clear, Colonel? Westmore stiffened. Crystal clear, sir. As Westmore stalked away, General Mitchell joined Steele. Making friends as usual, I see. Never been my strong suit, Frank. He's not entirely wrong, you know. Autonomous systems are part of our future. I know that, but they can't be our only future. Not when they can be compromised like this. Steele gestured to the chaos around them. Today proved that we need a balanced force. High tech when it works, low tech when it doesn't. Mitchell nodded. You ready for this, Bill? Deploying to Europe at your age with barely functional tanks and green crews? Steele thought of his first deployment to Vietnam, a young lieutenant in an M48 Patton, scared out of his mind but determined not to show it. He thought of Desert Storm, the thunder of Iron Thunder's main gun as they charged across the Iraqi desert. He thought of all the young men and women who had served under him, who had lived and died in American tanks. A tank commander never quits, Frank. You know that. I do indeed. Mitchell extended his hand. Godspeed, Bill. Make the old tankers proud. 4 hours later, Steele stood on the tarmac at Fort Hood as C-17 Globemaster aircraft landed one after another. The massive cargo planes had been diverted from missions worldwide for this emergency deployment. Tank transporters ferried the restored Abrams from the maintenance facility to the waiting aircraft, where loadmasters directed them up the rear ramps. Sergeant Major Wilson approached, clipboard in hand. Sir, we've got 27 tanks loaded. Crews are briefed and ready. The remaining 10 will be wheels up within 2 hours. Good work, Calvin. Steele watched as another Abrams, its engine roaring, maneuvered carefully into a C-17. How are the crews holding up? Nervous, sir. Most have never deployed before, and certainly not like this. But they're solid. We've paired each tank with at least one veteran NCO from our cadre. Steele nodded, then frowned as he spotted a familiar figure near one of the waiting tanks. Is that Major Steele? Wilson followed his gaze. Yes, sir. He volunteered to deploy with the advance element. Said his background in electronic warfare might be useful if the situation deteriorates further. Steele walked over to where the Major was checking his gear beside a tank transport vehicle. Major, he called. I didn't see your name on the deployment roster. The younger man straightened. I added it this morning, sir, with General Mitchell's approval. You're not a tanker, son. No, sir, but I know how these systems can be compromised. If our adversary tries to interfere with the tanks directly, I might be able to help counter it. Steele studied him for a moment. The Major had spent his career advocating for the very systems that now lay paralyzed by the cyber attack. Yet here he was, volunteering to deploy with the obsolete technology he had once dismissed. What changed your mind, Major? The younger man hesitated. Sir, when the XM-1s went rogue at White Sands, 2 of my colleagues were in the observation post that was fired upon. If those had been production models with full ammunition loads, he didn't finish the thought. He didn't need to. Welcome aboard, Major. Steele extended his hand, which the Major shook firmly. But understand something. Once we're on the ground in Europe, tank rules apply. When I give an order, it's executed immediately. No debates, no technology assessments. Lives will depend on it. Understood, sir. A senior airman approached, saluting. Colonel Steele, your aircraft is ready, sir. Steele returned the salute. Thank you, Airman. He turned back to the Major. Wheels up in 30 minutes. Grab your gear. As the Major hurried off, Steele took a moment to survey the scene before him. American tanks being loaded onto cargo aircraft for emergency deployment to Europe. It could have been an image from the Cold War, not the digital age of the 21st century. His phone buzzed with a message from Dr. Harding. Iron mesh prototype accelerated. We'll have first unit ready when you land in Germany. Godspeed, Colonel. Steele tucked the phone away and walked toward his waiting aircraft. As he climbed the ramp, he paused to look back at Fort Hood, at the place where generations of American tankers had trained for wars they hoped would never come. Whatever awaited them in Europe, be it a show of force or actual combat, he knew one thing with absolute certainty. When everything else failed, when the networks went down and the satellites were blinded, America would still have men and women in steel boxes, ready to do what tankers had always done: fight, adapt, overcome, and never ever quit. The rear ramp of the C-17 began to close, sealing Steele inside with the M1A2 Abrams that would lead the deployment. In the dim cargo hold, the tank's silhouette loomed like a slumbering beast, its main guns secured for transport, but still radiating lethal potential. A young specialist approached, offering a set of flight headphones to block the deafening roar of the aircraft's engines during takeoff. "Thank you, specialist," Steele said, taking the headset. Then he paused, struck by the soldier's youth. "First deployment?" "Yes, sir," the specialist replied, anxiety evident despite his professional demeanor. "Never thought I'd be going to Europe with tanks, sir. My dad did that during the Cold War." Steele nodded, understanding the historical symmetry. "What's your position?" "Loader, sir, on Thunder 7. The specialist gestured toward one of the tanks secured in the cargo hold. "You know the job of a loader isn't just putting rounds in the breech, son. It's being the heart of the crew. Keeping morale up. Being ready when everyone else is exhausted." "Yes, sir. My tank commander told me the same thing." Steele clapped him on the shoulder. "Good. Remember your training, trust your crew, and never quit." "Never quit, sir," the young soldier repeated, the phrase becoming a talisman against the uncertainty that lay ahead. As the massive aircraft began to taxi, Steele secured himself in a jump seat facing the tank. In 36 hours, these steel beasts would once again be on European soil, ready to do what they were built for. Ready to show the world that America's armored fist could still strike with devastating force, with or without its technological advantages. The future of warfare might belong to autonomous systems and artificial intelligence. But today, in this moment of crisis, the old ways had become new again. And William Bill Steele, who had spent his life in and around American tanks, found himself exactly where he needed to be. At the tip of the spear, leading from the front, a tank commander to the end. The deafening roar of the C-17's engines faded as Colonel William Bill Steele stood on the tarmac at Ramstein Air Base in Germany. Dawn was breaking over the horizon, casting long shadows across the fleet of M1 Abrams tanks being unloaded from their massive transport aircraft. 37 American tanks, hastily resurrected from the boneyard at Fort Hood, now stood on European soil, a steel contingent sent to counter the growing threat at NATO's eastern border. Sergeant Major Calvin Wilson approached, his breath visible in the cold morning air. "All tanks accounted for, sir. Maintenance crews are conducting post-flight checks now." Steele nodded, surveying the scene before him. German soldiers watched with undisguised curiosity as the American tanks were offloaded. For many of them, seeing American armor rushing to Europe was something they had only heard about in Cold War stories from their fathers and grandfathers. "Have you heard anything new from EUCOM?" Steele asked. Wilson shook his head. "Communications are still spotty. The cyber attack has been partially contained, but our secure networks are operating at minimal capacity. We're essentially flying blind until we can establish our own comms." Steele was about to respond when a staff car approached. Lieutenant General James Harper, the deputy commander of U.S. European Command, stepped out, his face grim. "Colonel Steele," Harper said, offering his hand, "I wish we were meeting under better circumstances." "As do I, General." Harper gestured toward a nearby hangar. "Let's talk inside. The situation has evolved." In the privacy of the hangar's makeshift command center, Harper unfolded a map across a table. Red markers indicated troop movements along NATO's eastern frontier. 3 mechanized divisions conducting exercises 15 kilometers from the border, Harper explained. Another 2 divisions have joined them in the last 24 hours. Meanwhile, our satellite coverage is intermittent at best, and half our networked weapon systems are still compromised. Steele studied the map, mentally calculating distances and terrain. And the status of NATO forces? The Germans have mobilized their 10th Armored Division. The British are deploying elements of the Royal Tank Regiment. The Poles have their entire armored capability on high alert. Harper paused. "But Colonel, I need to be frank. These aren't the armor forces of the Cold War. European tank strength has been hollowed out over the last 2 decades. They've been focused on counterinsurgency operations, just like us. What about our own forces in Europe? The 1st Armored Division has about 60 operational Abrams at Grafenwohr, but they're struggling with the same electronic warfare attacks that hit stateside. Their most advanced systems, the ones we've spent billions developing, are the most vulnerable." Steele absorbed this information silently. The situation was grimly reminiscent of scenarios he had wargamed decades ago at the Army War College, but with a cruel twist. America's technological edge, the advantage they had counted on for so long, had been neutralized. "So what's the mission, General?" Steele finally asked. "Deterrence," Harper replied. "Your tanks will deploy to Poland, join with NATO forces there. Show of force. Make it clear that despite the cyber attacks, we still have conventional capabilities that can't be hacked or jammed." Steele nodded slowly. "And if deterrence fails?" Harper's eyes met his. "Then you do what tankers have always done, Colonel. You fight, and you buy time for reinforcements." As Harper departed, Steele remained in the hangar, studying the map. Major David Steele entered, carrying a laptop. "Sir, Dr. Harding just made contact from Fort Hood. The iron mesh system is ready for field testing. She's transmitted the schematics and installation protocols." "Good. Get our comms team working on it immediately." Steele traced a finger along the map, following the route to the Polish border. "And find me someone who knows the terrain in this region. We're not going to be traveling on highways." The major hesitated. "Sir, these tanks were meant for desert warfare. The forests and wetlands in eastern Poland are exactly what the Abrams was originally designed to fight in," Steele interrupted. "Before Desert Storm, before Iraq, the M1 was built to fight in the Fulda Gap. Forests, hills, and narrow valleys, just like what we're heading into. Our crews just need to relearn what my generation knew instinctively." 12 hours later, the convoy of American tanks rolled eastward. Steele rode in the lead vehicle, an armored Humvee equipped with the prototype iron mesh communication system. Behind him stretched the column of 37 Abrams tanks, their turbine engines humming with barely restrained power. Lieutenant Colonel Rodriguez had divided the tanks into 4 companies, each led by one of the veteran tankers Steele had brought with him. The rest of the crews were a mixture of current active duty personnel and hastily recalled reservists, many of whom had never expected to find themselves driving tanks across Europe in what felt increasingly like the opening moves of a new Cold War. In the command Humvee, Major Steele monitored the iron mesh system, which provided secure, short-range communications between the tanks without relying on satellite uplinks or conventional radio frequencies that could be jammed. "Systems holding stable, sir," the major reported. "Range is limited to about 5 kilometers, but it's completely isolated from external networks. They can't hack what they can't access." Colonel Steele nodded, watching the German countryside roll past. Farmers stopped their work to watch the procession of American armor. Some waved, others simply stared, their faces unreadable. "How much combat experience do we actually have in this convoy, Major?" Steele asked. The younger man consulted his tablet. "Among the tank commanders, about 60% have seen action in Iraq or Afghanistan. But, sir, that was primarily counterinsurgency operations, engaging irregular forces, IEDs, urban combat. None of them have experience in force-on-force armor engagements against a near-peer adversary. And the gunners? Less experienced overall. Most have only conducted live-fire exercises at gunnery ranges." Steele absorbed this information silently. His generation of tankers had trained relentlessly for high-intensity conflict against Soviet armor. They had studied every aspect of their potential adversaries: tactics, equipment, capabilities. The newer generation had spent their careers fighting a completely different kind of war. "We're going to need to run some intensive training once we reach the assembly area," Steele said. "Rodriguez has the old manuals?" "Yes, sir. He's already preparing a crash course in Cold War-era armored warfare tactics." The convoy crossed into Poland late that evening, greeted by a small contingent of Polish officers at the border. The lead Polish officer, Colonel Andrzej Kowalski, approached as Steele climbed down from his vehicle. "Colonel Steele," Kowalski said, offering his hand, "welcome to Poland. Your reputation precedes you." "Thank you, Colonel. I hope we're both overreacting to the current situation." Kowalski's expression remained serious. "I wish that were the case. My father was a tanker in the Polish People's Army during the Cold War. He always said the Americans were the only thing preventing the Russians from rolling all the way to the Atlantic. Some things, it seems, never change." The Polish colonel led Steele to a map displayed on a tablet. "We've prepared an assembly area for your tanks here, about 30 kilometers from the border. It's an old Soviet-era training ground, plenty of open space for your vehicles, and the terrain matches what you might encounter if the situation deteriorates." "Perfect," Steele replied. "My men need to reacquaint themselves with fighting in this kind of environment." As the convoy prepared to continue to the assembly area, Steele pulled Major Steele aside. I want you to contact Lieutenant Colonel Westmore back at the Pentagon. The major looked surprised. Sir, I thought you and Westmore were— We have our differences, Steele interrupted. But he knows more about the electronic warfare capabilities we're facing than anyone else in the program. Tell him I need everything he has on countermeasures, vulnerabilities, anything that might give us an edge if things go hot. Yes, sir. The assembly area was precisely what Steele had hoped for, a sprawling complex of rolling hills, dense forests, and open fields that had once been used to train Warsaw Pact forces for an invasion of Western Europe. Now it would serve as the training ground for Americans preparing to defend NATO's eastern flank. By sunrise the next day, Steele had established a command post in an old concrete observation bunker overlooking the training area. Maps covered the walls, marked with potential avenues of approach, choke points, and defensive positions. Sergeant Major Wilson entered, accompanied by a young sergeant wearing the insignia of a tank gunner. "Colonel, this is Sergeant Jenkins," Wilson said. He was top of his gunner class at Fort Benning last year. Steele recognized the young man from Fort Hood, the private who had been skeptical about the relevance of tanks in modern warfare. "Jenkins," Steele acknowledged, "I see you've been promoted since we last met." "Yes, sir," Jenkins replied. "Field promotion. They needed experienced gunners." "And are you experienced, Sergeant?" Jenkins hesitated. 3 years in the turret, sir. 2 deployments to Syria, but we never engaged armor." Steele nodded thoughtfully. "What's your highest score at the gunnery range?" 987 out of 1,000, sir." Wilson's eyebrows raised slightly. It was an impressive score. "Good," Steele said. "Because starting today, you're going to be teaching our gunners how to hit targets they can barely see, in conditions they've never experienced, using techniques that went out of fashion before they were born." Confusion crossed Jenkins' face. "Sir?" Steele led the young sergeant to a window overlooking the training area. "Our technological advantage has been neutralized, Sergeant. No thermal imaging, no laser rangefinders, no GPS, no fancy target acquisition systems. Just iron sights, manual rangefinding, and the gunner's eye." "With respect, sir, that's impossible. Modern tank gunnery relies on systems that can be hacked, jammed, or disabled," Steele interrupted. "My generation learned to shoot the old way first, then added the technology. Your generation started with the technology. Now you need to learn what to do when it fails." Wilson stepped forward. "We've set up the range with hull-down positions and concealed targets, just like the old days at Grafenwohr." Jenkins looked between the 2 older men, realization dawning. "You want us to fight like it's 1980? "Exactly, Sergeant," Steele replied, "because our adversary is counting on the fact that you can't." By midday, the sound of tank engines filled the training area as crews maneuvered their Abrams through the dense forests and rolling hills. Lieutenant Colonel Rodriguez had divided the training into 3 phases: movement, communication, and gunnery. In the movement phase, tank commanders learned to navigate without GPS, using only maps, compasses, and terrain association. In the communication phase, they practiced using the iron mesh system for short-range tactical coordination without relying on higher echelon command networks. But it was the gunnery phase that proved most challenging. Without their advanced fire control systems, crews struggled to identify targets, estimate ranges, and achieve hits. Steele watched from the observation bunker as a tank fired and missed a stationary target at 1,500 meters, a shot that would have been routine with functioning technology. "They're getting frustrated," Major Steele noted, standing beside him. "Good," what the colonel replied. "Frustration leads to adaptation. Adaptation leads to survival." "Sir, I've made contact with Lieutenant Colonel Westmore," the major said, changing the subject. "He's agreed to send everything he has on the electronic warfare systems we're facing." Colonel Steele turned to face his namesake. "Did he say anything else?" "Just that he hopes you're wrong about the autonomous systems. But if you're not, he wants our people to come home alive." Steele nodded. Despite their differences, Westmore was still a soldier, and soldiers looked out for their own. As the day progressed, Steele moved between training stations, offering guidance, sharing experiences from his own combat deployments, and gradually rebuilding the institutional knowledge that had been lost in the decades since the Cold War. At the gunnery range, he climbed into the commander's position of a stationary Abrams, where Sergeant Jenkins was struggling to teach a gunner how to use manual rangefinding. "May I?" Steele asked, and Jenkins nodded. Taking the position behind the gunner's sight, Steele adjusted the controls with practiced ease. "See that ridgeline? Count the mil dots from the base to the top. Multiply by the known height of the average tree. Divide by the constant. That gives you your range. The gunner, a specialist in his early 20s, looked confused. Sir, I've never done that before. I know, son, but your grandfather did. And he hit targets with tanks that had a fraction of the capability of this machine. Steele patted the gunner's shoulder. You can learn this. You have to. By evening, progress was visible but limited. The crews were adapting, but slowly. Steele called his senior officers together for an assessment. We've got good people, Lieutenant Colonel Rodriguez reported. They want to learn, but we're trying to compress years of training into days. Sergeant Major Wilson nodded agreement. The tank commanders are picking things up faster than the gunners and drivers. Leadership adapts quicker than technical skills. And our readiness level? Steele asked. The officers exchanged glances. Finally, Rodriguez spoke. If we had to fight tomorrow, I'd rate us at 40% combat effectiveness. Maybe 50% by the end of the week if we continue intensive training. Steele absorbed this grim assessment. That may have to be enough. Intel suggests we might not have much more time. The meeting was interrupted by Major Steele rushing into the bunker, tablet in hand. Sir, UCOM has just elevated the alert status. Satellite imagery shows enemy armor moving to forward staging areas less than 5 kilometers from the border. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. The exercises had transformed into pre-invasion positioning. How many? Steele asked quietly. Early estimates suggest 300 tanks in the forward elements alone. Support echelons indicate preparations for sustained operations. 300 against 37. The odds were beyond daunting. We need to accelerate our training schedule, Steele decided. 24-hour operations, rotate crews through rest periods. I want every tank and every crew ready to move to defensive positions within 48 hours. As the officers dispersed to implement the new schedule, Colonel Kowalski arrived with fresh intelligence. Colonel Steele, the Polish officer said grimly, our border monitoring posts report increased electronic warfare activity. Communication systems are being systematically targeted with jamming. The same pattern as before, Steele muttered. Blind us before they move. There is more, Kowalski continued. Our sources report that the enemy's newest tanks are equipped with countermeasures specifically designed to defeat Western targeting systems. Steele nodded slowly. They've been studying us while we were looking elsewhere. Precisely. They believe they have neutralized our technological advantage. They do not expect us to be able to fight without it. A grim smile formed on Steele's weathered face. Then that's exactly what we'll give them. A style of warfare they think is extinct. That night, under the cover of darkness, Steele implemented what he called Operation Ghost Dance, an intensive program to transform his small force of modern tanks into a fighting unit capable of operating as if it were 1985. Dr. Harding arrived from the United States, bringing with her the latest iteration of the Iron Mesh communication system in a team of engineers. They worked through the night, hardening the Abrams electronic systems against jamming and cyber attack. It's not perfect, she explained to Steele, as they stood beside a tank undergoing modification, but it creates a closed, local network that can't be accessed from outside. The tanks can still communicate with each other within about 5 kilometers, even if all other systems are being jammed. And the fire control systems? Harding grimaced. That's more problematic. The digital systems are too integrated to be completely isolated. But we've created a manual override that will allow the gunners to use the optical sights if the electronic systems are compromised. Steele nodded. Like having power steering in a car, but still being able to turn the wheel when it fails. Exactly. It won't be as precise, but it will function. As dawn broke, Steele received word that NATO reinforcements were en route. British Challenger tanks, German Leopards, and Polish PT-91s. But they were still days away from reaching the potential battlefield. If the enemy decided to move, Steele's 37 Abrams would stand nearly alone against the first wave. Major Steele found the colonel studying maps in the command bunker. Sir, Lieutenant Colonel Westmore has sent the electronic warfare assessment. It's concerning. Steele examined the report on the major's tablet. Westmore had outlined in detail how their adversary had likely compromised Western military networks, focusing particularly on the digital systems that modern tanks relied upon for targeting, communication, and situational awareness. According to Westmore, they can selectively jam or spoof our targeting systems, the major explained. Make us see targets that aren't there or not see ones that are. Steele's expression darkened, just like the XM1 prototypes at White Sands. Yes, sir, but he's also identified a potential weakness in their approach. The Major highlighted a section of the report. They're focusing on disrupting network-dependent systems. Anything that requires satellite uplink, GPS, or central command network integration. But not direct line-of-sight optical systems, Steele murmured, seeing where this was heading. Exactly, sir. They're not prepared to counter a force that can operate without those networks. A plan began forming in Steele's mind. A desperate gambit, but one that might work against an enemy that had prepared to fight a high-tech opponent. Major, I need you to gather all tank commanders immediately and get me Lieutenant Colonel Rodriguez and Sergeant Major Wilson. Within 30 minutes, the tank commanders assembled in the bunker. Steele stood before them, his face illuminated by the glow of a tactical display. Gentlemen, in the next 48 hours, we may be called upon to defend NATO territory against a numerically superior force, he began. They have neutralized many of our technological advantages, but they have not accounted for the most important factor on any battlefield, the human element. He gestured to the map. We will deploy into defensive positions along these three axes of advance. We will operate under electronic silence. No radio communication except through the iron mesh system, and only when absolutely necessary. We will use visual signals, just as tankers did before the digital age. Sergeant Jenkins raised his hand. Sir, without our advanced targeting systems, how are we supposed to engage effectively? The same way your grandfathers did, Sergeant. With skill, with courage, and with tactics they no longer teach at the armor school. Steele moved to a whiteboard and began sketching. Hold down positions, reverse slope defense, hit and displace. We use the terrain to mask our movements and force them to expose themselves. He drew a simple diagram showing tanks positioned behind ridgelines, only their turrets visible. We have one advantage they don't expect. We can fight without technology. They've trained to counter our digital systems, not our human skills. For the next hour, Steele outlined his battle plan. It was a throwback to Cold War tactics. Dispersed platoons operating semi-autonomously, using terrain to maximize their defensive potential while minimizing exposure to enemy fire. Questions, Steele asked as he concluded. A young lieutenant spoke up. Sir, we're still outnumbered at least 8-1. Even with perfect tactics, the math doesn't work in our favor. Steele nodded. You're right, Lieutenant. If we fight a conventional engagement, we lose. So we won't fight conventionally. We'll fight like our grandfathers did against the Germans in the Ardennes. We'll fight like we're already dead, with nothing to lose and everything to gain. The room fell silent as his words sank in. One more thing, Steele added. This isn't just about defending territory. It's about buying time. Every hour we delay their advance is another hour for NATO reinforcements to arrive. Another hour for our cyber teams to restore our network capabilities. We aren't expected to win. We're expected to fight. As the commanders filed out to brief their crews, Lieutenant Colonel Rodriguez approached Steele. Sir, permission to speak freely? Always, Mike. This plan, it's a last-ditch strategy, the kind you only use when you've exhausted all other options. Steele met his gaze steadily. We have exhausted all other options. Our sophisticated weapons have been compromised. Our networks are vulnerable. All we have left is what we've always had, courage, skill, and the will to prevail against the odds. Rodriguez nodded slowly, just like 73 Easting. Exactly like 73 Easting, except this time we're the ones outgunned and outnumbered. The deployment began at midnight. Under cover of darkness, the Abrams tanks moved to their designated positions along the likely avenues of approach. Steele had divided his force into 4 companies, each assigned to cover a specific sector. Alpha Company, led by Lieutenant Colonel Rodriguez, took position along the northern approach, a narrow valley flanked by dense forest. Bravo Company, under Sergeant Major Wilson, covered the central approach, a series of rolling hills that offered multiple hold-down positions. Charlie Company, commanded by a captain Steele had selected for his tactical acumen, defended the southern approach, a mix of open fields and scattered woodlands. Delta Company, the smallest with just 7 tanks, remained in reserve under Steele's direct command, ready to reinforce whichever sector faced the main enemy thrust. By dawn, all units were in position. Steele established his command post in an abandoned farmhouse with clear views of all 3 sectors. Major Steele set up the iron mesh communication hub, maintaining tenuous contact with each company. All units report ready, sir, the major informed him. Electronic warfare activity has increased dramatically in the last hour. Most standard communication channels are being actively jammed. Steele nodded grimly. Just as expected, they're preparing to move. At a 7:30 hours, the first reports came in from forward observation posts. Enemy armor was on the move, crossing the border in battalion strength. Their main thrust appeared to be directed at the central sector, directly toward Bravo Company's position. Steele studied the tactical display, which showed limited information due to the jamming. Order Bravo Company to hold fire until the enemy reaches the phase line Alpha. No premature engagements. We need to draw them in. Major Steele transmitted the order through the iron mesh system, receiving a terse acknowledgement from Sergeant Major Wilson. In the central sector, Wilson's tanks lay in wait, nestled into depressions behind ridgelines, only their turrets visible above the crests. Camouflage netting broke up their outlines, making them difficult to spot against the backdrop of trees and brush. Through his commander's sight, Wilson watched as the enemy armor approached, a long column of tanks advancing confidently across open ground, apparently unaware of the American positions. "Steady," he murmured to his gunner. "Range to lead vehicle?" 1,800 meters in closing, Sergeant Major, the gunner replied. "Manual range finding confirmed." "Target?" "Lead tank, commander's right." Wilson watched as the enemy column continued to advance, now 1,500 meters away. Phase line Alpha was at 1,200 meters, the optimal engagement distance they had calculated based on terrain and visibility. "All Bravo Victors," Wilson transmitted through the iron mesh. "Stand by for initiation on my command. I say again, hold for phase line Alpha." The seconds stretched into minutes as the enemy armor drew closer. Wilson could now clearly see the distinctive profile of the lead tanks through his sight. They were advancing in a textbook formation, but with surprising confidence, as if they didn't expect resistance. "They think their electronic warfare has blinded us," Wilson realized. "They don't know we're here." When the lead tank crossed phase line Alpha, Wilson gave the command that tankers had been giving since the first armored battles of World War I. "Fire!" The sound of 10 120mm guns firing in near unison shattered the morning calm. Through his sight, Wilson watched as his gunner's round struck the lead enemy tank directly in the turret face. The vehicle erupted in a geyser of flame and smoke. All along the ridgeline, American tanks engaged their targets. 8 enemy tanks were hit in the initial volley, 5 catastrophically destroyed. But the enemy recovered quickly. The surviving tanks reversed course, seeking cover behind terrain features while returning fire. Their superior numbers allowed them to maintain continuous suppressive fire while maneuvering to flank the American positions. "Bravo 6 to all victors," Wilson transmitted. "Displaced to secondary positions. Execute." The American tanks backed down from the ridgeline, dropping into defilade positions where they were completely protected from direct fire. Using the reverse slopes for cover, they moved laterally to new firing positions several hundred meters from their initial locations. When they reappeared on the ridgeline, they were firing from unexpected angles, confusing the enemy's attempt to fix their positions. At the command post, Steele monitored the engagement through the limited data available on the iron mesh network. Without aerial reconnaissance or functioning battlefield management systems, he relied on direct reports from his company commanders. "Bravo Company reports 8 enemy vehicles destroyed, 3 damaged," Major Steele relayed. "Enemy is attempting to flank their position from the east." Steele studied his map, calculating. "Order Delta 3 and 4 to reinforce Bravo's eastern flank. The rest of Delta remains in reserve." As he issued the order, new reports came in. Enemy armor now engaging Alpha Company in the northern sector. Approximately 40 tanks identified. Steele frowned. The enemy was probing all sectors simultaneously, looking for weakness. Alpha Company's status? Holding position. 2 tanks reporting minor damage from long-range fire, but still combat effective. Before Steele could respond, the farmhouse shook as artillery shells began impacting nearby. The enemy had located the command post. "Move everything to the alternate CP," Steele ordered calmly as plaster dust filtered down from the ceiling. "Maintain the iron mesh connection at all costs." As his staff hurriedly relocated equipment, Steele remained at the map table, plotting the enemy's movements and calculating his response. The pattern was becoming clear. The enemy was pushing hardest in the central sector while applying pressure in the north and south to prevent reinforcement. It was a classic pincer movement, designed to fix the defenders in place while enveloping their flanks. Once the command post was relocated to an underground bunker 2 kilometers to the rear, Steele received updated reports from all sectors. The situation was deteriorating rapidly. "Bravo Company has lost 3 tanks. Enemy numbers increasing as second echelon forces arrive. Alpha Company reports enemy infantry with anti-tank missiles infiltrating the forest on their flank. Charlie Company is holding but reports ammunition running low for main guns. Steele absorbed this information with outward calm, though inwardly he felt the weight of command pressing down upon him. His small force was fighting valiantly, but the outcome was never really in doubt. They were delaying the enemy, exacting a price in blood and steel, but they could not stop them indefinitely. "How long have we been engaged?" he asked Major Steele. 2 hours and 17 minutes, sir." Steele nodded. Every minute they held was another minute for NATO reinforcements to approach, another minute for the cyber teams to restore their network capabilities. "Order all companies to begin phased withdrawal to the secondary defensive line," he commanded. "One platoon at a time, covering fire from the others. Textbook delay action." As the order was transmitted, an urgent message came in from Lieutenant Colonel Rodriguez in the northern sector. "Alpha Company reports enemy electronic warfare unit identified. Appears to be the source of the jamming affecting our systems." Steele's eyes narrowed. "Location? Grid coordinate Lima X-ray 7498, approximately 6 kilometers behind enemy lines." Steele stared at the map, an audacious plan forming in his mind. If they could neutralize the enemy's electronic warfare capability, they might restore their technological advantage. The advanced targeting systems, the network-centric operations, all the capabilities that made the Abrams the most lethal tank in the world. But reaching the target meant penetrating deep behind enemy lines with no support and little chance of extraction. "Major, I need 4 volunteers," Steele said. "The best tank commander and crew we have." The major looked confused. "Sir? We're going to kill the snake by cutting off its head." Steele pointed to the map. "That EW unit is controlling their entire jamming operation. If we can destroy it, we might level the playing field." Understanding dawned on the major's face, followed by concern. "Sir, with respect, that's a suicide mission. You'd have to pass through their entire forward line, then penetrate 6 kilometers into enemy territory." "I'm aware of the odds, Major." Steele's voice was quiet but firm. "That's why I need volunteers, not assigned personnel." Major Steele hesitated, then straightened. "I volunteer, sir." Steele shook his head. "Denied, Major. You're needed here to maintain the Iron Mesh network." Before the major could protest, Sergeant Major Wilson's voice came through on the Iron Mesh. "Bravo actual to command. I couldn't help overhearing. I volunteer." Steele wasn't surprised. Wilson had been with him at 73 Easting. They had charged into the teeth of Iraqi armor then and prevailed against the odds. "Acknowledged, Bravo actual. Select your best crew and rendezvous at Checkpoint Delta in 30 minutes. "Roger that, Bravo 6 out." Steele turned to his staff. "Prepare a detailed route to the target using terrain masking as much as possible. And I want every scrap of intelligence we have on enemy dispositions along that route." As his staff hurried to comply, Major Steele approached him. "Sir, permission to speak freely?" "Go ahead, Major." "You're planning to go with them, aren't you?" Steele met the younger man's gaze steadily. "I've never asked my men to take a risk I wouldn't take myself. But sir, you're the commander. The entire operation will continue under Lieutenant Colonel Rodriguez, if necessary." Steele placed a hand on the major's shoulder. "This is a mission that requires experience, Major. The kind of experience that can't be taught in a classroom or a simulator." The major wanted to argue further but recognized the determination in Steele's eyes. "Yes, sir, I'll prepare the briefing materials." 30 minutes later, Steele arrived at Checkpoint Delta, a small copse of trees 3 kilometers behind the front line. Sergeant Major Wilson was already there with his tank, accompanied by a crew Steele recognized as one of the most proficient in training exercises. "Just like old times, eh, Colonel?" Wilson said as Steele approached. "Not quite, Calvin. We're a lot older, and this isn't a demoralized Iraqi army we're facing." Wilson nodded soberly. "I've briefed the crew. They understand the risks." Steele looked at the 3 young men standing beside the Abrams, a gunner, a loader, and a driver. None appeared older than 30, yet all had the steady gaze of soldiers who had accepted their mortality. "Gentlemen," Steele addressed them, "this mission is strictly voluntary. There's a high probability we won't make it back. If any of you wish to remain behind, now is the time to say so." The tank's gunner, Sergeant Jenkins, stepped forward. "With respect, sir, we've already discussed it. We're going." Steele studied the young sergeant's face, seeing determination where there had once been skepticism. "Very well, mount up." As Steele climbed into the commander's position, Major Steele approached with a final update. Sir, we've identified what appears to be a drainage culvert here, he pointed to the map, that might allow you to bypass their forward security screen. After that, you'll have approximately 4 kilometers of forested terrain that should provide cover from observation. Steele nodded. And the target? Latest intelligence suggests it's a mobile EW platform mounted on an armored vehicle, accompanied by a security element of about a platoon strength. Weapons? Unknown, sir. Likely a mix of infantry fighting vehicles and dismounted troops. Steele absorbed this information, calculating risks and probabilities. If we succeed in destroying the EW platform, how quickly can our systems be restored? Dr. Harding estimates 30 minutes to an hour for basic functionality, longer for full capability. That will have to do. Steele folded the map and tucked it into his pocket. Maintain the defensive line as long as possible. If we succeed, you'll know it when your systems start coming back online. And if you don't return, sir? Steele's expression remained impassive. Then Lieutenant Colonel Rodriguez assumes command, and you continue the fight until relieved by NATO reinforcements. The major saluted, a gesture Steele returned before closing the commander's hatch. Inside the tank, the crew was performing final checks on their systems. Weapon status? Steele asked. Main gun loaded with heat round, Jenkins replied from the gunner's position. 28 rounds total in ready rack. Engine? Turbine at operating temperature, fuel tanks full, the driver reported. Comms? Iron mesh operational, sir, Wilson confirmed from his position. All other systems powered down to minimize electronic signature. Steele nodded, then addressed the crew through the intercom. Gentlemen, we're about to attempt something that hasn't been done since Vietnam. A deep penetration raid behind enemy lines with a single tank. Our mission is simple but critical. Destroy the enemy electronic warfare platform that's jamming our battlefield systems. If we succeed, we restore our technological edge and possibly turn the tide of this engagement. He paused, allowing his words to sink in. I won't lie to you, the odds are against us, but throughout history, tankers have faced long odds and prevailed through skill, courage, and the willingness to take calculated risks. That's what we're doing today. Any questions? The tank fell silent except for the low hum of the turbine engine. Then let's go hunting, Steele said. Driver, move out. The Abrams lurched forward, its tracks churning through the soft earth as it began its solitary journey toward enemy lines. As they approached the forward edge of the battle area, Steele scanned the horizon through his commander's sight. In the distance, he could see flashes of gunfire where American and enemy forces continued to engage one another. The main battle was still raging, which meant all eyes would be focused there, not on a single tank moving stealthily through the countryside. Driver, head for the drainage culvert at map grid Mike Tango 346, Steele ordered. Maintain minimum speed for noise reduction. The tank moved slowly along a tree line, using the natural contours of the land to mask its profile from observation. Despite its 68 tons, the Abrams could be surprisingly stealthy when handled by a skilled driver. Within 20 minutes, they reached the drainage culvert, a concrete tunnel about 4 meters wide, passing under a raised roadbed. It was large enough for the tank, but with minimal clearance. This is going to be tight, Wilson observed. Driver, center the vehicle and proceed slowly, Steele ordered. Gunner, traverse the turret to 6 o'clock position to minimize width. The Abrams crept forward into the culvert, its tracks scraping occasionally against the concrete walls. The sound echoed alarmingly in the confined space. Steady, Steele urged as the driver made a slight correction. We're halfway through. After what seemed like an eternity, the tank emerged on the other side, now technically behind enemy lines. Steele immediately directed the driver to a nearby clump of trees for concealment while he assessed their situation. According to intelligence, they were now approximately 5 kilometers from the EW platform. The intervening terrain was a mix of forest and small agricultural fields, good for concealment, but challenging for rapid movement. We'll follow the tree lines as much as possible, Steele decided. When we must cross open ground, we'll do so at maximum speed. For the next hour, they maneuvered carefully through the landscape, stopping frequently to scan for enemy forces. Twice they had to hide as enemy helicopters passed overhead. Once they froze in place as an enemy infantry patrol passed within 100 meters of their position. But their luck held, and they continued to advance toward their target. At the 4-kilometer mark, they encountered their first major obstacle, a main supply route with steady traffic of enemy vehicles moving toward the front. We need to cross this road, Steele said, studying the flow of traffic through his sight. There's no way around it. Wilson nodded. We'll need perfect timing. Wait for a gap, then cross at maximum speed. They observed the traffic pattern for 10 minutes, noting that the vehicles typically moved in groups with 3 to 4 minute gaps between them. Next gap, we go, Steele decided. Driver, prepare for rapid acceleration on my command. When the last vehicle in a convoy passed and the road appeared clear, Steele gave the order. Driver, move now, maximum speed. The tank surged forward, its turbine engine roaring as it accelerated to nearly 45 mph across the open road. They made it to the other side and into a small forest just as another enemy vehicle appeared in the distance. That was too close, Jenkins muttered from the gunner's position. It'll get closer, Wilson replied grimly. As they approached their target area, Steele ordered the tank to a halt in a dense copse of trees. According to their intelligence, the EW platform should be within a kilometer of their position. Gunner, scan the area to our front, focusing on any unusual antenna configurations or vehicle groupings, Steele ordered. Jenkins methodically searched the area through his sight, moving from left to right in a practice pattern. I have something, sir, he reported after several minutes. Grid Quebec Whiskey 590, large vehicle with multiple antenna arrays. 5 smaller vehicles in protective formation around it. Steele observed through his own sight, identifying the target. The EW platform was mounted on an armored vehicle chassis surrounded by infantry fighting vehicles in a star pattern. A textbook security formation. Range? 800 meters, sir. Steele considered their options. A frontal assault would be suicidal against the combined firepower of the security vehicles. They needed a more subtle approach. There's a depression running from our position to about 300 meters from their perimeter, Wilson pointed out. If we follow it, we could get close enough for a high-probability main gunshot on the EW platform before they can effectively respond. Steele nodded. We'll need to be quick. One shot at the EW platform, then immediate withdrawal using smoke for concealment. He outlined the plan to the crew. They would maneuver to within 300 meters, using the depression for cover, fire a single heat round at the EW platform, then immediately deploy smoke and retreat along a different road. Questions? Steele asked. There were none. Each man understood his role and the critical timing required. Driver, move out. Use the depression for concealment. Minimum speed. The Abrams began its final approach, creeping forward through the shallow ravine that provided just enough depression to hide its hull from direct observation. Steele maintained constant surveillance of the target, watching for any sign that they had been detected. At 400 meters, the ravine began to shallow out. They would soon be exposed. This is as far as we can go under concealment, Steele announced. Gunner, confirm target acquisition. Target acquired, sir. EW platform centered in primary site. Load heat round. Heat loaded and ready, the loader confirmed. Steele took a deep breath. The next few seconds would determine the success or failure of their mission, and possibly the fate of the entire defensive operation. Driver, on my command, you will accelerate to the firing position, then immediately reverse at maximum speed once the gun fires. Gunner, you will have one shot. Make it count. Loader, prepare smoke grenades for immediate deployment after the shot. Each crew member acknowledged his instructions. Execute. The tank surged forward, cresting the small rise that had concealed it. The enemy security vehicles immediately began to react, turrets swiveling toward the unexpected threat. But Jenkins was faster. The main gun roared, sending a high-explosive anti-tank round directly into the EW platform. The vehicle erupted in a massive fireball as its electronic components and fuel ignited. Target destroyed, Jenkins called out. Smoke, 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 Steele ordered as enemy fire began to impact around them. The loader deployed the smoke grenades, creating a thick wall of obscuration as the driver threw the tank into reverse, backing rapidly down the way they had come. An enemy round struck the front of the Abrams, but the depleted uranium armor held, absorbing the impact without penetration. Driver, left turn, then proceed to Rally Point Bravo, Steele commanded, referring to a pre-designated exfiltration point. As they maneuvered away from the engagement area, enemy fire became increasingly inaccurate, the security vehicles unable to maintain target acquisition through the smokescreen. We did it, Wilson said, a note of disbelief in his voice. We actually did it. We're not home yet, Steele reminded him. Driver, maintain maximum speed until we reach the tree line. The Abrams raced across open ground, finally reaching the cover of forest just as enemy helicopters appeared overhead, searching for the tank that had struck so boldly and disappeared. Steele activated the iron mesh communicator. Ghost 6 to command. Target destroyed. Repeat, target destroyed. Returning to friendly lines. Through the static came Major Steele's voice. Command acknowledges. Be advised, we're already seeing primary systems coming back online. Well done, Go 6. As they began the perilous journey back to friendly territory, Steele allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. They had accomplished their mission against overwhelming odds. Now they just had to survive the return trip. In the command bunker, Major Steele watched with growing excitement as the battlefield management systems gradually returned to life. Tactical displays that had been dark for days now flickered with information as satellite links and data networks were restored. Sir, we're receiving telemetry from the forward units, a communications specialist reported. Fire control systems coming back online, targeting networks reestablishing. Major Steele nodded, then turned to Lieutenant Colonel Rodriguez, who had assumed temporary command. Time to counterattack, he suggested. Rodriguez studied the tactical display, which now showed the disposition of enemy forces with increasing clarity. The enemy is still advancing, but their formation has gaps. They didn't expect us to restore our capabilities so quickly. He pointed to a particular sector where enemy armor was bunched up in a vulnerable configuration. There, that's our target. All units with restored fire control systems concentrate on that sector. The order went out, and across the battlefield, American tanks that had been fighting blind suddenly regained their technological edge. Advanced thermal imaging systems detected enemy vehicles through smoke and vegetation. Laser rangefinders provided precise targeting data. Stabilized gun systems delivered accurate fire even while moving. The effect was devastating. Enemy tanks that had been advancing confidently now found themselves under precise, coordinated fire from multiple directions. Their own electronic warfare advantage neutralized, they began taking heavy losses. Enemy forces in the central sector beginning to withdraw, the intelligence officer reported. Northern sector reporting decreased pressure as enemy units redeploy to cover their center. Major Steele allowed himself a moment of hope. They weren't winning, not yet, but they had changed the dynamics of the battle. What had been a fighting retreat was now becoming a genuine contest. Any word from Go 6? He asked. The communications officer shook his head. Nothing since their last transmission. They were maintaining radio silence during exfiltration. Major Steele nodded, trying not to think about the odds against a single tank successfully penetrating enemy lines, completing its mission, and returning safely. As if in answer to his thoughts, a new contact appeared on the tactical display, a single American tank signature moving rapidly through enemy territory, pursued by multiple hostile contacts. That's them, Major Steele said, pointing to the display. They've got company. Rodriguez studied the situation. They're not going to make it to our lines. Too many pursuers. He made a quick decision. Alpha Company detached 2 platoons for immediate counterattack along Axis Blue. Mission: extract friendly unit returning from deep penetration mission. The response was immediate. 6 American tanks broke from their defensive positions and charged toward the approaching contact, guns blazing as they engaged the pursuing enemy vehicles. In the command position of his Abrams, Colonel Steele directed evasive maneuvers as they raced toward friendly lines, enemy fire impacting around them. 2 infantry fighting vehicles and a helicopter gunship had picked up their trail and were in hot pursuit. 800 meters to friendly forces, Wilson reported, monitoring their position on the now functioning tactical display. We're not going to make it, Jenkins said as a round from the pursuing vehicles struck the rear of the tank, damaging the engine compartment. Warning lights illuminated throughout the crew compartment. Driver, maintain speed as long as possible, Steele ordered. Gunner, traverse turret to 6 o'clock, engage nearest pursuer. Jenkins rotated the turret, acquiring the lead enemy vehicle in his sight. Target acquired. Fire. The main gun roared, and the enemy vehicle disappeared in a fireball. But the damage to their own tank was worsening. The turbine engine began to lose power, thick black smoke pouring from the engine compartment. We're losing mobility, the driver reported. Engine temperature critical. Steele made a rapid assessment. Driver, continue as far as possible, then find a defensive position. We'll make a stand there. The Abrams lurched forward, its speed dropping steadily as the damaged engine struggled to maintain power. They managed another 400 meters before the engine failed completely, the tank rolling to a stop in a small depression that offered minimal cover. Engine's dead, sir, the driver reported. Gunner, maintain coverage of R6. Loader, prepared to defend against dismounted infantry. Sergeant Major, get on the iron mesh and update command on our situation. As Wilson made the call, Steele surveyed their position through his sight. The remaining enemy vehicles were approaching cautiously, apparently wary of the Abrams' main gun despite its immobility. Command acknowledges, Wilson reported. Friendly forces inbound from the north. ETA 3 minutes. We need to hold this position for 3 minutes, Steele told his crew. Conserve ammunition. Make every shot count. The enemy seemed to sense their vulnerability. The infantry fighting vehicle maneuvered to a flanking position while dismounted troops began to appear, working their way through the vegetation toward the stranded tank. Infantry, 2 o'clock, 100 meters, Steele called out. Cokes! Jenkins engaged the coaxial machine gun, sending a burst of 7.62 millimeter rounds toward the approaching infantry. They scattered, seeking cover, but continued to advance. The enemy fighting vehicle fired, its rounds striking the turret of the Abrams, but failing to penetrate the heavy armor. Gunner, target the IFV, Steele. Jenkins acquired the target, adjusted for the slight elevation difference, and fired. The heat round struck the enemy vehicle directly in the engine compartment, disabling it instantly. But the infantry continued to close in, using the disabled vehicle as cover. Small arms fire began to impact the Abrams, pinging harmlessly off its armor but signaling the closing noose. 2 minutes to friendly arrival, Wilson updated. Steele knew they needed to hold out just a little longer. Loader, deploy smoke grenades to the north and east. Give our approaching friends some cover for their final approach. The loader complied, and soon thick smoke obscured portions of the battlefield, making it harder for the enemy infantry to maintain effective fire on either the stranded tank or the approaching friendly forces. Through his commander's sight, Steele detected movement to the northwest, the distinctive silhouettes of American tanks advancing at high speed. Here they come, he announced to his crew. Friendly forces approaching from the northwest. Gunner, maintain fire discipline. Do not engage to the northwest. The rescuing tanks appeared through the smoke, main guns blazing as they engaged the enemy infantry and remaining vehicles. The suddenness of their appearance and the precision of their fire sent the enemy into disarray, many breaking cover and retreating. Within minutes, the immediate threat had been neutralized. An American tank pulled alongside Steele's disabled Abrams, its commander opening his hatch and saluting. Colonel Steele, sir. Lieutenant Parker, Alpha Company. We're here to bring you home. Steele returned the salute, relief washing over him. Excellent timing, Lieutenant. My compliments to your gunner. Thank you, sir. We've secured the area, but we need to move quickly. Enemy reinforcements are likely inbound. Steele nodded, then addressed his crew. Gentlemen, prepare to abandon vehicle. Bring essential equipment only. As they climbed from the disabled tank, Steele paused, placing his hand on the hot metal of the turret. This machine had carried them deep into enemy territory, accomplished a near impossible mission, and almost brought them home. Leaving it behind felt like abandoning a wounded comrade. But tanks, like the men who crewed them, sometimes had to make the ultimate sacrifice. Set the demolition charges, he ordered. We're not leaving her for the enemy. Wilson nodded, understanding the necessity. They quickly placed the emergency demolition charges, standard equipment designed to prevent sensitive technology from falling into enemy hands. Once his crew was safely aboard the rescue vehicles, Steele activated the detonator. The charges exploded, rendering the Abrams' sensitive equipment and armored technology unusable. As they withdrew toward friendly lines, Steele watched the burning hulk of his tank recede in the distance. It had been a good tank, crewed by brave men. They had accomplished their mission against overwhelming odds. They had proven that in warfare, as in life, the human element, courage, skill, and determination, could overcome technological advantages. Most importantly, they had bought time. Time for NATO reinforcements to arrive. Time for the tide of battle to turn. Lieutenant Parker's voice interrupted his thoughts. Sir, Lieutenant Colonel Rodriguez reports that the enemy advance has been halted across all sectors. NATO reinforcements are now arriving in significant numbers. Steele nodded, satisfaction tempering the fatigue that now washed over him. They had done what they set out to do. They had shown that American tankers, even when outgunned and outmanned, would never quit. As they approached the forward edge of friendly territory, Steele saw a line of tanks arrayed in defensive positions, a mix of American Abrams, German Leopards, and British Challengers. The NATO alliance standing firm. And beyond them, to the rear, countless more armored vehicles were arriving, the reinforcements they had fought so desperately to buy time for. Looks like we've got company, Wilson observed. The good kind, Steele replied. The kind that ensures we don't have to stand alone. For the first time in days, Colonel William Steele Bill Steele allowed himself to believe that they might not just survive this crisis but prevail. Not because of technological superiority or numerical advantage, but because of the quality that had always defined the best tankers, the absolute, unwavering refusal to quit, no matter the odds. The Pentagon war room fell silent as the satellite feed displayed the battlefield. What had begun as a desperate holding action by a handful of American tanks was evolving before their eyes. NATO reinforcements were pouring into the region, British Challengers, German Leopards, Polish PT-91s, and more American Abrams flown in from bases across Europe. Lieutenant Colonel Westmore stood transfixed by the display, his earlier skepticism replaced by grudging respect. "They actually did it," he muttered. "They held the line with 37 tanks against 300. General Mitchell nodded beside him. "They did more than hold, they adapted. When everything we built failed, they relied on what we've always had, courage, skill, and the refusal to quit." "And Colonel Steele?" Westmore asked. "Do we have confirmation he survived?" Mitchell's face tightened. "Last report has him returning to friendly lines after destroying the enemy EW platform. His tank was disabled, but rescue forces reached him." He checked his watch. "We should know more within the hour." The door to the war room opened, and the Secretary of Defense entered, followed by the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. The room snapped to attention. "As you were," the Secretary said, approaching the tactical display. "Update me." General Mitchell stepped forward. "Sir, NATO forces have stabilized the front. Enemy advances halted across all sectors. Their electronic warfare advantage has been neutralized, and our technological edge is being reasserted." "Casualties?" Mitchell's expression sobered. 11 tanks destroyed, 16 damaged but repairable. 23 crew members wounded, 8 killed in action. The Secretary nodded grimly. "And Colonel Steele's operation?" "Successful beyond expectations, sir. His team penetrated enemy lines, destroyed their primary EW platform, and escaped. The effect was immediate. Our systems came back online, and the tactical situation reversed within hours." The Secretary studied the display, where blue NATO icons now outnumbered the red enemy forces. "The President wants a full briefing, and he specifically asked about Steele." "I'll have a complete report ready within the hour," Mitchell promised. As the senior officers huddled around the display, Westmore found himself drawn to a different screen, one showing body camera footage from a medic treating wounded at a forward aid station. The image was grainy and unstable, but he could clearly make out Colonel Steele, his uniform torn and bloodied, refusing treatment until his men were seen to first. It was an image at odds with everything Westmore had come to believe about modern warfare, that technology, not human courage, would determine victory. Yet here was living proof that even in an age of autonomous weapons and artificial intelligence, the human factor remained decisive. His phone buzzed with a message from his team at the Autonomous Systems Laboratory. "XM1 diagnostics complete. Vulnerability confirmed in core targeting protocols. Countermeasures under development." Westmore stared at the message, then back at the image of Steele. For the first time, he considered that perhaps both approaches had merit, that the future might lie not in choosing between human judgment and technological advantage, but in finding the proper balance between them. At a field hospital near the Polish border, Colonel William Steele sat on the edge of an examination table, wincing as a doctor cleaned a shrapnel wound on his shoulder. "You're lucky, Colonel," the doctor said. "Another centimeter and this would have hit your brachial artery." Steele barely registered the words. His mind was still on the battlefield, with the men who hadn't made it back. 8 good men who would never see home again. 8 letters he would personally write to families explaining how their sons, husbands, and fathers had died defending freedom on distant soil. "Sir," the doctor's voice broke through his thoughts. "I said you need to rest, at least 24 hours. "Not possible, doctor. I have a debriefing with UCOM in 2 hours. The doctor frowned but recognized the futility of argument. "At least take these antibiotics, and try to keep the dressing clean." Steele nodded, accepting the medication. As he pulled his torn uniform shirt back on, the tent flap opened. Major David Steele entered, looking exhausted but relieved. "Sir, good to see you in one piece." "Mostly," Steele replied with a grimace. "What's our status?" "All NATO forces have consolidated along the new defense line. The enemy has ceased offensive operations and begun withdrawing their forward elements. Intelligence suggests they're reassessing in light of our restored capabilities and the NATO reinforcements." "And our tanks?" 26 operational, sir. The rest are under repair or lost." Steele nodded, absorbing the cost. Each lost tank represented a crew of 4 men who had trusted him with their lives. Some had paid the ultimate price. The men performed exceptionally, Major Steele continued, especially considering the circumstances. Every commander, gunner, loader, and driver exceeded expectations. They adapted to fighting without their advanced systems exactly as you trained them to. They're good men, Steele said simply. They just needed to remember what tankers have always known, that the machine serves the man, not the other way around. Outside the medical tent, activity had increased dramatically. Transport aircraft were landing at the nearby airfield, disgorging fresh troops and equipment. The NATO response, initially delayed by the cyber attack, was now in full swing. Sir, the major said hesitantly, there's something else you should know. The White House has been asking for updates on your status every 30 minutes. The president wants to speak with you personally. Steele raised an eyebrow. About what? I think they're looking for a hero, sir. The public needs one right now. Steele shook his head. The heroes are the ones who didn't come back, Major. Make sure they understand that. Before the major could respond, Sergeant Major Wilson appeared at the tent entrance. Despite the bandage around his head and his arm in a sling, he stood rigidly at attention. Colonel, sorry to interrupt, but Lieutenant Colonel Rodriguez is assembling the surviving tank commanders for a debrief. Thought you'd want to be there. Ooh. Steele nodded, rising stiffly from the examination table. Lead the way, Calvin. As they walked through the bustling military encampment, Steele noted the mix of units and nationalities. American, British, German, Polish, and others, all working together with purpose and determination. The NATO alliance, forged in the aftermath of World War II, was proving its worth once again. They reached a large command tent where about 20 officers and NCOs were gathered around a tactical display. Lieutenant Colonel Rodriguez looked up as they entered. Attention, he called, and everyone snapped to attention. At ease, Steele said immediately. This isn't a formal inspection. As the men relaxed, Steele moved to the center of the group. He recognized each face. Tank commanders who had fought under his orders, risking their lives to defend NATO territory against overwhelming odds. Some were bandaged. All looked exhausted. But in their eyes, he saw something else. Pride. Gentlemen, Steele began, I'll keep this brief. You've all been through enough without having to endure a long speech. He paused, making eye contact with each man. What you accomplished over the past 72 hours will be studied at the armor school for generations to come. You faced an enemy with superior numbers, supported by advanced electronic warfare capabilities that neutralized our technological advantage. By all conventional metrics, you should have been overrun within hours. He moved to the tactical display, which showed the battlefield as it had been during the height of the engagement. Instead, you adapted. You relied on skills that many thought were obsolete: terrain reading, manual gunnery, visual range estimation. You operated without the digital systems you've trained with your entire careers, and you prevailed. Steele looked up from the display. That said, we paid a heavy price. 8 good men won't be going home to their families. I will personally bear that burden for the rest of my life. But know this, their sacrifice was not in vain. Intelligence reports confirm that the enemy has begun withdrawing their forward elements. The immediate threat to NATO territory has been averted. A murmur ran through the assembled officers. For many, this was the first confirmation that their efforts had actually succeeded. Questions, Steele asked. A young lieutenant raised his hand. Sir, what happens now? Do we return to the States? Steele shook his head. Not immediately. Operation Iron Forge continues. Our mission has evolved from emergency deployment to establishing a permanent, credible armored deterrent in the region. You've demonstrated what a small force can accomplish. Imagine what a fully prepared, properly equipped armored division could do. Another officer spoke up. Colonel, with respect, we were lucky. If the enemy had committed their full strength from the beginning, or if your mission to destroy their EW platform had failed, then we would have fought until the last tank in the last round, Steele finished, and bought enough time for NATO reinforcements to arrive. He gestured to the tactical display. War isn't just about firepower or technology, Captain. It's about imposing your will on the enemy, making them believe that despite the odds, you will not break. That's what you all did. As the debrief concluded, Steele found himself approached by Sergeant Jenkins, the young gunner who had once questioned the relevance of tanks in modern warfare. Sir, Jenkins said, I owe you an apology. When we first met at Fort Hood, I thought tanks were outdated, that autonomous systems and drones were the future. He looked down, then met Steele's gaze directly. I was wrong. Steele studied the young sergeant. Were you? Autonomous systems and drones are part of our future, Jenkins. Just not the only part. He placed a hand on the sergeant's shoulder. The lesson isn't that technology is bad. It's that we can't become so dependent on it that we forget the fundamentals. Jenkins nodded thoughtfully. I understand that now, sir, and I'll make sure the newer guys do too. As Jenkins walked away, Steele realized something profound had occurred. The passing of knowledge from one generation to the next. The lessons he and his contemporaries had learned during the Cold War, nearly lost in the rush toward digitization and automation, were being rediscovered and revalued. That night, as Steele tried to rest in his temporary quarters, the pain in his shoulder made sleep elusive. He found himself reviewing the events of the past few days, analyzing decisions, considering alternatives. The weight of command and of the lives lost under his orders pressed down on him. A knock at his door interrupted his thoughts. Enter, he called. Major Steele appeared, holding a secure tablet. Sorry to disturb you, sir, but General Mitchell is on a secure line from the Pentagon. He says it's urgent. Steele took the tablet, recognizing his old friend's face on the screen. Frank, it's late here. Must be the middle of the night in Washington. No one's sleeping much at the Pentagon these days, Bill, Mitchell replied. His expression was serious. How's the shoulder? I'll live. What's so urgent it couldn't wait until morning? Mitchell hesitated, then spoke directly. The president is going to call you within the hour. Before he does, there's something you need to know. He paused. The Secretary of Defense is creating a new command, the Armored Warfare Center of Excellence. It will oversee the complete rebuild of our tank forces, from equipment modernization to doctrine development to crew training. The president wants you to command it. Steele frowned. Frank, I'm 63 years old. I was pulled out of retirement for this emergency. I'm not looking for a new career. It's not about your career, Bill. It's about everything you've been saying for years, that we've neglected our conventional armor capabilities while chasing technological solutions. The crisis proved you right. Now you have the chance to fix it, to rebuild our armored forces properly. Steele remained silent, considering the implications. There's more, Mitchell continued. Your medical results came back. The doctors found something during your examination. Steele's expression didn't change. What kind of something? The kind that requires immediate attention. Heart anomalies, Bill. Significant ones. The chief medical officer wants you evacuated to Walter Reed as soon as possible. Now Steele understood the urgency. How bad? Mitchell's face revealed more than his words. Bad enough that they're surprised you made it through the strain of the past week without a major cardiac event. The doctors are recommending immediate surgery, followed by extensive treatment. Steele absorbed this information with the same calm he had shown under enemy fire. Prognosis? Uncertain at this point, they need more tests. Mitchell leaned closer to the camera. Bill, I know you. You'll want to stay with your men to finish what you started, but this isn't something you can power through with sheer stubbornness. Steele managed a wry smile. That's exactly what I was planning to do. Well, don't. You've done your part. Now let the doctors do theirs. Mitchell's expression softened. When the president calls, tell him you accept the new command. It will give you a purpose during recovery. And frankly, Bill, no one else can do what needs to be done. You have the credibility, the experience, and now the proof that your approach works. After the call ended, Steele sat alone in his quarters contemplating his situation. The heart issues didn't surprise him entirely. His father had died of a heart attack at 65, his grandfather at 62. The men in his family were not known for their longevity. What troubled him was the timing. Just when he had the opportunity to rebuild America's armored forces properly, to ensure that the lessons of the recent crisis were institutionalized rather than forgotten, his own body was betraying him. When the president's call came through, Steele accepted the new command with one condition, that he be allowed to handpick his leadership team from the officers and NCOs who had fought alongside him in Europe. The president readily agreed. 3 days later, a medical transport aircraft carried Colonel William Steele back to the United States. Major David Steele accompanied him, now serving as his aide and prospective deputy at the new Armored Warfare Center of Excellence. I've been reviewing your service record, Major, Steele said as they flew over the Atlantic. Impressive academic credentials. Top of your class at West Point. Masters in computer science from MIT. The major looked surprised. Thank you, sir. Yet you volunteered for a suicide mission behind enemy lines with an old man who was openly skeptical of your entire field of expertise. Major Steele considered his response carefully. I believe in serving where I'm needed, sir, and in learning from experience, even when it contradicts my preconceptions. Good answer, the colonel said, because that's exactly what I'll need from you at the new command. Sir? I don't have a computer science degree, Major. I don't understand artificial intelligence or autonomous systems beyond the basics. What I do understand is armored warfare, the tactics, the terrain considerations, the human factors that determine victory or defeat. Steele met the younger man's gaze. The future isn't going to be tanks versus autonomous systems. It's going to be finding the right integration of human judgment and technological advantage. Major Steele nodded slowly, understanding dawning. You want me to help bridge that gap? Precisely. I need someone who understands both worlds, the traditional armored warfare that proved its worth in the recent crisis, and the technological systems that will inevitably be part of our future. The conversation was interrupted by a call from the medical team monitoring Steele's condition. After a brief discussion, the major returned looking troubled. The doctors at Walter Reed have reviewed your latest test results. They've moved your surgery to within 24 hours of landing. Colonel Steele nodded, unsurprised. How long for recovery? 6 to 8 weeks minimum before you can return to limited duty. Longer for full clearance. The major hesitated. Sir, they're recommending medical retirement after the procedure. Of course they are, Steele replied with a hint of amusement. Army doctors have been trying to retire me since Desert Storm. This is different, sir. The condition is serious. Steele's expression hardened. So is the task ahead of us, Major. I didn't survive a 3-to-1 armored engagement just to be sidelined by a faulty ticker. He gestured to the briefcase containing their working documents. Let's continue. We have a lot to accomplish before we land. For the remainder of the flight, they drafted the organizational structure for the new Armored Warfare Center of Excellence. Steele envisioned 3 main divisions: doctrine development, training modernization, and technology integration. Each would be led by officers who had proven themselves during the recent crisis. Lieutenant Colonel Rodriguez for doctrine development, Steele decided. He has the academic background combined with practical command experience. Sergeant Major Wilson for training modernization, Major Steele suggested. The NCOs respect him, and he bridges the old and new schools of thought. Agreed, and for technology integration, Steele paused, considering. I'm thinking Lieutenant Colonel Westmore. The major looked startled. Westmore? But he's been your most vocal opponent on autonomous systems. Exactly, Steele replied. He believes in the technology. He'll advocate for it effectively, but he's also seen firsthand what happens when those systems are compromised. He'll build in redundancies, fallbacks, and having him on the team sends a message. This isn't about choosing sides in the man versus machine debate. It's about creating the most effective fighting force possible. By the time they landed at Andrews Air Force Base, they had a complete organizational plan, initial staffing recommendations, and a 12-month roadmap for establishing the new command. A medical team was waiting on the tarmac, and despite Steele's protests, they immediately transferred him to a waiting ambulance for transport to Walter Reed National Military Medical Center. I'll handle the initial briefings at the Pentagon, sir, Major Steele assured him. Everything is prepared. Steele nodded, suddenly feeling the fatigue he had been fighting for days. Perhaps it was the stress catching up with him, or perhaps it was his body finally acknowledging what the medical tests had revealed, that he was running on borrowed time. Keep me updated, Major, and remember, no compromises on the core principles. We build this right, or we don't build it at all. Understood, sir. Good luck with the surgery. As the ambulance doors closed, Steele settled back on the gurney, closing his eyes. For the first time in weeks, the weight of command temporarily lifted from his shoulders. Others would carry the burden for now. The next morning, Steele was prepped for surgery. The procedure was complex, a triple bypass combined with valve replacement. The surgical team explained the risks, which were significant given his age and overall condition. Just do your job, doctor, Steele told the lead surgeon. I've faced worse odds. Before the anesthesia took effect, Steele had an unexpected visitor. Lieutenant Colonel Westmore appeared at his bedside, looking uncomfortable in the hospital environment. Colonel, Westmore said formally, I heard about your condition. I wanted to wish you well before your surgery. Steele studied the younger officer, and noting the conflict evident in his expression. Thank you, Colonel. That's not the only reason you're here, though, is it? Westmore hesitated, then spoke directly. I've been offered a position in your new command, Technology Integration Division. And you're wondering why I would want you, given our professional disagreements. Yes, sir, exactly that. Steele adjusted himself on the hospital bed, wincing slightly at the movement. Because you believe in what you're doing, Westmore. You're committed to advancing military technology, but you're also a soldier, which means you ultimately care about one thing, bringing our people home alive. He continued before Westmore could respond. The recent crisis taught us both something important. My generation was too quick to dismiss new technologies as unreliable. Your generation was too quick to abandon proven methods in favor of digital solutions. The truth, as usual, lies somewhere in between. Westmore considered this. You want me because I'll fight for the technological side of the equation. I want you because you'll make sure we don't repeat the mistakes that led to this crisis, becoming so dependent on advanced systems that we couldn't function when they failed. Steele met Westmore's gaze directly. Will you take the position? After a moment's consideration, Westmore nodded. Yes, sir, I will. Good. Now get out of here. I have a date with a scalpel. As Westmore departed, the anesthesiologist approached. Ready, Colonel? Steele nodded, feeling an uncharacteristic sense of uncertainty. Unlike battlefield dangers, this was an enemy he couldn't fight directly. All he could do was trust others to do their jobs while he lay unconscious and vulnerable. Ready as I'll ever be, Doctor. The anesthesia flowed into his veins, and the world gradually faded to black. Steele drifted in and out of consciousness over the following days. Fragments of conversations reached him through the fog of medication, medical terms he didn't understand, updates on his condition, voices of doctors and nurses, and other voices, General Mitchell, Major Steele, even the Secretary of Defense at one point. When he finally regained full consciousness, he found himself in a private recovery room. The steady beep of cardiac monitors filled the silence. His chest felt as if it had been split open and wired back together, which he realized was exactly what had happened. A nurse noticed he was awake and approached his bedside. Good morning, Colonel. How are you feeling? Like I've been run over by an Abrams, Steele rasped, his throat dry from the breathing tube that had been removed only hours earlier. That's to be expected. You underwent major surgery. She checked his vital signs. The doctor will be in shortly to explain everything. In the meantime, you have visitors waiting. Do you feel up to seeing them? Steele nodded, and the nurse departed. A few minutes later, Major Steele entered, followed by Sergeant Major Wilson. Sir, the major greeted him. Good to see you awake. How long? Steele asked. 4 days since the surgery, Wilson answered. You gave the doctors quite a scare. Your heart stopped twice on the table. Steele absorbed this information. And the new command? Proceeding according to plan, Major Steele reported. The initial staffing is approved. Facilities are being prepared at Fort Hood. Lieutenant Colonel Rodriguez is handling the doctrine development framework, and Lieutenant Colonel Westmore has already assembled his team for technology integration. Steele nodded, satisfied that work was continuing despite his absence. And the tanks we left in Europe? Most are being repaired and will remain there as part of the enhanced NATO presence, Wilson explained. Some are being shipped back as training platforms for the new command. The ones that were destroyed, well, their memory will live on. Before they could continue, the door opened again. A doctor entered, accompanied by General Mitchell. Colonel Steele, this doctor said, I'm Dr. Harrison, your cardiac surgeon. I need to speak with you about your condition. He glanced at the visitors. Perhaps privately? They can stay, Steele insisted. What's the verdict, doctor? Dr. Harrison reviewed the chart in his hands. The surgery was more complex than anticipated. We replaced one valve and performed a triple bypass. There were complications. Your heart stopped twice, as I'm sure you've been told. We were able to resuscitate you, but the events caused additional stress to an already compromised system. He paused, meeting Steele's gaze directly. Colonel, I'll be blunt. The damage to your heart is severe and irreversible. While the surgery addressed the immediate issues, your overall cardiac function remains significantly impaired. Meaning what exactly? Steele asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Meaning that your military career is over. I'm recommending immediate medical retirement. With proper medication and lifestyle changes, you can expect to live, but your heart will never again be strong enough for the physical demands of active duty. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. After a lifetime in uniform, after surviving multiple wars and countless dangers, it wasn't enemy fire that would end William Steele's military career, but his own body. How long do I have, doctor? Steele finally asked. Dr. Harrison hesitated. With strict adherence to medication and lifestyle restrictions, perhaps 5 years, possibly more. But Colonel, you need to understand, any significant physical or emotional stress could trigger a fatal event at any time. Steele nodded, his expression revealing nothing of his inner thoughts. Thank you for your honesty, Doctor. After the doctor departed, General Mitchell approached the bed. Bill, I'm sorry. If I had known your condition was this serious, I never would have pulled you out of retirement for the deployment. Then who would have led those tanks, Frank? Who else understood what needed to be done? Steele shook his head. No regrets. We accomplished the mission. Yes, we did. Mitchell placed a hand on his friend's shoulder. And now we need to focus on your recovery. The Armored Warfare Center can proceed under acting leadership until you're stronger. Steele met his gaze steadily. The doctor just told me I'll never be stronger. Frank, 5 years at best. And that's if I sit on my porch sipping lemonade and watching the world go by. He gestured dismissively. Not exactly my style. What are you saying, Bill? I'm saying that I have a choice. Spend whatever time I have left trying to prolong the inevitable, or use that time to complete one final mission, to ensure that what we learned in Europe isn't forgotten when the next crisis comes. Mitchell studied his old friend, recognizing the determination in his eyes. It was the same expression he had seen before every battle, every difficult mission. The doctors won't clear you for duty, not with this diagnosis. They don't need to clear me for combat, Frank, just for administrative duties. I can run the new command from a desk if necessary. And if it kills you faster, Steele smiled grimly, then I die doing what matters, rather than wasting away in a retirement I never wanted in the first place. After his visitors departed, Steele lay alone in the hospital room, contemplating his situation. 5 years, perhaps less. A death sentence delivered not by an enemy bullet, but by his own failing heart. Yet rather than fear or regret, he felt a strange sense of clarity. His path forward was clearer than it had been in years. He had one final mission: to rebuild America's armored forces, to ensure that the lessons paid for in blood were not forgotten, to prepare the next generation for the challenges they would face. It would be his legacy, his final service to the country he had defended his entire life. 2 weeks later, against medical advice but with the reluctant approval of military authorities, Colonel William Steele was released from Walter Reed. His formal medical retirement was processed, followed immediately by his civilian appointment as director of the Armored Warfare Center of Excellence, a position created specifically to accommodate his unique situation. The center's headquarters was established at Fort Hood, Texas, close enough to Steele's ranch that he could return home each night rather than living on base, a concession to his condition that he accepted with reluctance but necessity. On his first day, he arrived to find the headquarters building adorned with a newly installed sign, Steele Armored Warfare Center of Excellence. Tank commanders never quit. Inside, the staff had assembled for his arrival. Familiar faces from the European deployment mixed with new personnel selected for their expertise in various aspects of armored warfare. Lieutenant Colonel Rodriguez stepped forward. Center staff, attention! As the assembled personnel snapped to attention, Steele raised a hand. At ease, everyone. We have too much work to do for formalities. Moving to the front of the room, he surveyed the faces before him. Despite his still healing chest and the cocktail of medications keeping his damaged heart functioning, Steele felt a surge of purpose. Ladies and gentlemen, our mission here is straightforward but vital. We will rebuild America's armored warfare capability from the ground up. Not just the equipment and technology, but the doctrine, the training, and most importantly, the mindset. He gestured to a large tactical display showing the European battlefield where they had faced overwhelming odds. What happened in Europe proves something that many had forgotten, that armored warfare remains relevant in the modern age, and that the human element remains decisive even in an era of advanced technology. Steele moved among the staff as he spoke, making eye contact with each person. Some of you fought alongside me. Others are joining our effort with fresh perspectives and specialized expertise. All of you are here because you represent the best of what our military has to offer. He stopped before a group of young officers, recent graduates of the Armor School who had been specially selected for the program. You are the future of armored warfare. You will inherit what we build here and carry it forward long after we're gone. Your mission is to learn, to question, to challenge assumptions, to ensure that we create not just what we need for today's threats, but for tomorrow's as well. Over the following months, the center took shape according to Steele's vision. The 3 divisions, doctrine development, training modernization, and technology integration, worked in close coordination, each informing the others. Rodriguez's doctrine development team studied the European engagement in minute detail, extracting lessons and developing new tactical approaches that combine traditional armored warfare principles with modern technological capabilities. Wilson's training modernization group revolutionized how tank crews were trained, incorporating both advanced simulators and old-school field exercises that forced crews to operate without their digital systems. And perhaps most surprisingly, Westmore's Technology Integration Division developed new systems that maintain the technological edge while building in manual backups and fail-safes that could be operated without network connectivity. Throughout it all, Steele provided guidance, drawing on his decades of experience while remaining open to new ideas and approaches. Despite his physical limitations, he tired easily and required frequent rest periods. His mind remained sharp and focused on the mission. 6 months into the program, Major David Steele found the colonel at his desk late one evening, reviewing training materials for the next day's session with tank commanders. "Sir, it's nearly midnight. Dr. Harrison was quite specific about you maintaining regular hours." Steele looked up, the fatigue evident on his face despite his attempt to mask it. "Just finishing up, Major. These new gunner qualification standards need to be ready for tomorrow's review." The Major studied him with concern. "Sir, permission to speak freely?" "Always." "You're pushing too hard. The medical team is worried. Your last checkup showed further deterioration in your cardiac function." He hesitated. "We all understand your dedication, but I'm killing myself faster than necessary?" Steele finished with a wry smile. "Perhaps, but consider the alternative, Major. I could follow the doctor's orders to the letter, extend my life by a few months or years, and leave this work half-finished." He gestured to the documents spread across his desk. "Or I can accept that my time is limited and focus on completing this final mission, ensuring that what we build here outlasts me, that the lessons we paid for in blood aren't forgotten when the next crisis comes." Major Steele nodded slowly, understanding. "At least let me help you finish these standards, sir. Two minds will work faster than one." For the next 2 hours, they worked together, refining the qualification standards that would ensure future tank gunners could operate effectively with or without their advanced targeting systems. It was detailed, meticulous work, the kind that rarely made headlines but formed the foundation of military readiness. As they concluded, the colonel leaned back in his chair, a thoughtful expression crossing his face. "You know, Major, when I was your age, I thought the most important thing was winning the next battle. Now I understand that the most important thing is making sure the next generation is ready to win their battles." "Is that why you're pushing so hard on this program, sir? For the next generation?" Steele nodded. "Partly, but it's also about honoring those who came before us. The tankers of World War II who stopped the Nazi advance. The Cold Warriors who stood ready to defend Europe for decades. The Desert Storm veterans who proved what American armor could do against a numerically superior foe." He paused. "And most recently, the 8 men who didn't come home from our deployment. Their sacrifice demands that we get this right." 1 year to the day after the European crisis, the Steele Armored Warfare Center of Excellence hosted its first graduation ceremony. 50 tank commanders representing every armor unit in the U.S. Army had completed the intensive 6-month program designed to transform them into teachers and leaders who would carry the center's principles back to their home units. Despite his deteriorating condition, Colonel Steele insisted on delivering the graduation address personally. He stood at the podium, his uniform hanging loosely on his thinning frame, but his voice still carrying the authority that had commanded men in 3 wars. "Gentlemen, today you join a lineage that stretches back to the first tanks that crossed no man's land in World War I. You are the inheritors of a tradition of courage, innovation, and adaptability that has defined armored warfare for over a century." He gestured to the row of tanks positioned behind the graduates, a mix of the latest M1A3 Abrams and older models that had been restored for training purposes. These machines represent the physical embodiment of American industrial might. But you represent something far more important: the human judgment, the tactical acumen, and the unwavering will that makes that steel effective on the battlefield. Steele paused, surveying the faces before him. Young men and women who would carry forward what he had built here. A year ago, 37 American tanks faced an enemy force 8 times their size, supported by advanced electronic warfare capabilities designed to neutralize our technological advantage. By conventional wisdom, they should have been quickly overrun. Instead, they adapted. They relied on skills many thought obsolete. They fought with courage and determination that no algorithm can replicate. He leaned slightly on the podium, gathering his strength. That is the legacy you inherit today. The understanding that while technology evolves and equipment advances, the fundamental nature of armored warfare remains constant. It is about imposing your will on the enemy through maneuver, firepower, and shock effect. It is about making decisions under pressure with imperfect information. And most importantly, it is about never, ever quitting, no matter how desperate the situation may appear. As the ceremony concluded, Steele remained seated while the graduates filed past, each pausing to shake his hand and receive a personalized tank commander's coin, a tradition he had established for the center. On one side, the coin bore the image of an Abrams tank. On the other, the simple phrase that had become the center's motto, "Tank commanders never quit." That evening, a small reception was held for the staff and graduates. Steele circulated slowly, conserving his energy while ensuring he spoke with each person. As the event wound down, he found himself approached by a familiar face, Sergeant Jenkins, now a newly minted tank commander himself. "Colonel, I wanted to thank you personally," Jenkins said, "not just for this program, but for what you taught me in Europe, about adaptability, about resilience, about never quitting." Steele nodded, studying the young sergeant who had once questioned the relevance of tanks in modern warfare. "You earned your place here, Jenkins. Your gunnery scores are among the highest we've seen." "Thank you, sir." Jenkins hesitated, then continued. "I've been assigned to the 1st Armored Division. I'll be leading a tank platoon in Germany, part of the enhanced NATO presence." "Good. They need solid leaders there. The crisis may be over, but the threat remains." Steele placed a hand on the younger man's shoulder. "Remember what you learned here, Jenkins. Not just the tactics and techniques, but the mindset. Technology will continue to evolve. Threats will change, but the fundamentals of leadership remain constant." "I will, sir. Tank commanders never quit." As the reception concluded, Steele found himself alone in the headquarters building, standing before the wall of honor that had been established to commemorate the 8 men lost during the European deployment. Their names, ranks, and units were engraved on a simple bronze plaque, accompanied by the motto they had lived and died by. Major Steele found him there, lost in thought. "Sir, your driver is waiting." "Thank you, Major. I'll be along shortly." He continued to study the names, committing each to memory once more. "Do you think we've done enough to ensure their sacrifice wasn't in vain?" The Major considered the question seriously. "I believe we've built something that will endure, sir. The principles you've established here are already being implemented across the armor branch. The next generation of tank commanders will be trained to operate effectively with or without their advanced systems. And most importantly, the mindset, the refusal to quit regardless of the odds. That's being instilled in every soldier who passes through this center." Steele nodded, satisfied with the assessment. "Good, because I won't be here to see it through much longer." The Major looked alarmed. "Sir?" "Don't look so worried, Major. I've known for weeks. The last medical review confirmed what I've been feeling. My time is running short." Steele turned from the memorial psalm. "That's why tomorrow's leadership transition is so important. Lieutenant Colonel Rodriguez will make an excellent director, and you, as his deputy, will ensure continuity of the vision we've established. Sir, with respect, you could continue in an advisory capacity. Your experience is already captured in the doctrine, the training programs, and the technological specifications we've developed." Steele smiled slightly. "Besides, I've never been good at backseat driving. Better to hand over the reins completely and let you younger men carry the burden." Before the Major could respond, Steele changed the subject. "Did the final test results come in from the iron mesh integration with the new Abrams variant?" "Yes, sir. Full compatibility achieved. Even under the most severe electronic warfare conditions, the tanks maintained platoon-level communication and fire control capabilities." "Excellent. That was the final piece I was waiting for." Steele moved toward the exit. "I'm ready to go home now, Major." 2 weeks later, on a crisp autumn morning, Colonel William Steele Bill Steele sat on the porch of his Texas ranch, watching the sunrise. Beside him, a small table held his morning coffee and a stack of letters, final correspondence to friends, colleagues, and the families of men who had served under his command. In the distance, he could hear the faint thunder of tanks on the Fort Hood training ranges, the sound that had defined his life for over 40 years. It was a good sound, a reassuring sound, the sound of young men and women preparing to defend their nation, just as he had done throughout his career. His heart felt heavy in his chest, the damaged muscle struggling to maintain its rhythm despite the medications flowing through his system. He had felt the change yesterday, a subtle shift, a further weakening. The doctors had warned him to recognize the signs. His time was running out. Yet as he sat watching the Texas landscape come alive with the morning light, William Steele felt no fear, no regret. He had lived a life of purpose and service. He had led men in battle and brought as many home as possible. And in his final year, he had built something that would outlast him, a center of excellence that would ensure the lessons he had learned over a lifetime would not be lost. The phone beside him rang. It was Major Steele calling with the morning update as he did each day. "Good morning, Major," Steele answered. "Good morning, sir. The new training cycle began today. 24 tank commanders from across the force, including 3 international students from Britain, Germany, and Poland." "Good. The international aspect is important. What we learned in Europe, we learned together with our allies." Steele took a sip of his coffee. "And the technology integration trials?" "Proceeding on schedule. Lieutenant Colonel Westmore's team has completed the hardening of the fire control systems against the latest electronic warfare threats. The tanks can now operate at 80% efficiency, even under complete network disruption." "Excellent. That was my primary concern." Steele paused, considering his next words carefully. "Major, I won't be coming in today, or tomorrow for that matter." The silence on the other end spoke volumes. "Sir, should I call Dr. Harrison?" "No need. We both know what he would say." Steele gazed out at the horizon. "I've made my peace with it, Major. I completed my final mission. Now it's up to you and the others to carry it forward." "Sir, the Major's voice faltered. "It's been an honor serving with you." "The honor has been mine, David. You've been a fine officer and a good friend. Take care of the center. Make sure it remains true to its purpose." After ending the call, Steele carefully sealed his final letters and placed them in a stack to be mailed. Then he settled back in his chair, watching as the sun climbed higher in the Texas sky. In the distance, the sound of tanks continued, the rumble of turbine engines, the occasional thunder of main guns firing on the range, the sound of American armor, training, and preparing for whatever challenges might lie ahead. Colonel William Steele Bill Steele smiled. His final mission was complete. The legacy was secure. The next generation was ready. And tank commanders never quit. They simply passed the torch to those who follow.